Hi, I'm Andrew Rich, and if you're like me, you look at the state of modern wrestling discourse and think, wow, what a cesspool. That's why I'm here to tell you about Music of the Mat Remix. That's right, your favorite wrestling music podcast is back with a new format, where I bring on a guest and we play songs related to wrestling-themed topics. It could be a wrestling reference, a wrestling concept, a wrestling pun, things of that nature. Now you might be saying, Andrew, that is a very, very tenuous connection to pro wrestling on a wrestling podcast network. Is this just an excuse to hang out with your friends and talk about music and ignore the rest of the wrestling landscape? Yes. Yes, it is. So listen to Music of the Mat Remix on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, available on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast player of choice.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jesse Collings, and joining me once again, he is a recurring guest on this show. He is our host of the Warren Hayes show or is it it's the Mr. Warren Hayes show, actually. I just botched
Yes.
that intro. The Mr. Warren Hayes show, which you can find live streaming. How many times a week are you live streaming, Warren? How many
I,
days?
I, I live stream twice a week now, Mondays and Thursdays.
Mhm.
That's what I do.
And he is, of course, our French-speaking Canada correspondent, not to be confused with any of
Mhm.
our other different parts of Canadian correspondence. It's Mr. Warren Hayes. Welcome back to the show, Warren.
Thank you very much for having me again, Jesse. It's my pleasure to be back, especially after the terrible outing I had last time where you had me on. I was sure, I was like, oh, Jesse's never going to have me back. That's it. He experienced old man rambling and getting confused in his thoughts. That's it. I'm cooked. But no, I'm back, and I'm extremely grateful.
Yeah, Warren, the standard is real low here. And as someone that's had Alan Forel on the show multiple times, rambling
Oh
is,
my
is not
God.
a problem.
It's funny because I poked fun at Adam Forel on my stream just last night. So there seems to be a theme going.
And I know, and after I just totally botched your intro, I'm no one to talk. Anyway, there was something happened with you, Warren, recently. I was watching Dynamite, which I believe was in Winnipeg this past week,
Hmm.
and I saw a sign on the front row of someone with a Mr. Warren Hayes show sign. And so, like, how much did that set you back? How much did it set you back to get that fan to hold that sign for you? I'm sure you must have
Well,
Venmoed them something, or
well,
they're
let me
related
tell
to
you.
you.
Let me tell you. I started by calling up Chris Harrington and asking him for the rates. For advertisement to begin with. And then it would be no surprise for you to learn that it was substantially cheaper to just, manipulate your listening audience into bringing signs, especially when they're, especially when they're right on the corner of the entrance, facing the hard cam, right, like at the bottom of the ramp,
Yeah,
which is
amazing
prime
location.
real estate. Prime real estate. Harrington didn't even offer that to me when I when I asked. There wasn't even. Of course, I didn't ask anyone to do this. We're joking. It was as much of a surprise for me as it was for you, everyone else. It was surprising and very well. It's good for the ego. What do you want from me?
Yeah,
like you
I would
know,
honestly be kind of uncomfortable if someone held up a sign that said like Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast or it said my name on it. Like I don't know if I would approve of that, to be honest.
well, I mean, the difference is that, as you pointed out, my name is in the
In the
name of my
show.
podcast. So, so I've given up that right to be embarrassed that someone has a sign with my name on it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Anyway, so what we're really here to talk about is the AEW Fan Survey. I just wrapped up kind of going through the final results and writing up my report, and this podcast is going to be dropping at the same time as the written report will be running on voicesofwrestling.com. So if you haven't seen the written report where I kind of go over all of the results, you can find that on voicesofwrestling.com. And obviously, maybe some of you are linked to this podcast because it will be linked in the article. So, welcome to people who made the journey to listen to the podcast. This is the third year that I have done this. It started as just kind of a random idea, and it's kind of evolved into what I think is going to be an annual tradition. And this year we set a record. We had the most respondents in the history of this. We got 1700 respondents officially, which is about double than what we got last year. So I'm really excited about that. This really made me mad, Warren. I got response from 49 states and not 50.
Okay. Who has no? What state has no AEW watchers?
Yeah, so the state we didn't get was Wyoming, which
Huh.
is makes sense because it's the least populated United States state. I guess Eric Bischoff didn't fill out this survey,
I wa-
unfortunately.
I was gonna
Uh,
say. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was too
yes.
busy with his big green egg or something. I don't
You think he cooks
know.
on a big green egg?
You've never ever listened to Eric Bischoff even before he got insufferable. He would
No, am I
always talk
exposing myself?
every 2 weeks. I swear he would talk about, oh, fired up the old big green egg and got some Omaha steaks on it. It all ties in, right? With the Conrad verse sponsorships. So he'd always be putting that over.
Okay, if it's a sponsor, that makes sense. He strikes me as a guy because he's like very much one of those like I only eat what I kill myself kind of guys, and I feel like those guys wouldn't be into the big green egg.
But there you go. There he is.
I feel like he'd be like, I only grill on a fire that I made myself, by rubbing two sticks together or something like that. Um, anyway, so next year, if you are listening to this and you are a resident of Wyoming, or you could just lie and entertain me because I don't really know if these people are giving the correct answers. And you want to say you're from Wyoming, that would please me tremendously.
Do
We
you
also
think
got
there's embarrassment? Is that what you're implying? Is that there's embarrassment of, stating that you're from Wyoming?
No, I'm saying that like you could like if you wanted to entertain me, you could be
Oh,
from
okay.
like New York and just say you're from Wyoming because we got like 100
Okay.
responses from New York. Um, we're gonna if I really wanted to get all 50 states, and the fact that we didn't get Wyoming is kind of upsetting. We did get 56 different countries, uh, which was
That's a
also
good
exciting.
trade-off. That's
Um,
a much more interesting trade-off, if you ask me.
yeah, I mean, we got somebody from Andorra, which I think has a population of like 30,000 people.
Yeah.
So like if the fact that we can get someone from Andorra where we can't get somebody from Wyoming is like, come on, guys, put together. Um, anyway, so it was really exciting to get so much feedback, and thank you to everyone who filled out the survey, and a big thanks to everyone who shared the survey in different kind of sections of the fandom, because one of the challenges with this kind of survey, and it happens every year, is that I don't want it to stick in like my bubble, like the Voices of Wrestling bubble, because I
Mm.
kind of know what those fans think. And I know that's like just a subset of AEW fans. I want it to kind of go everywhere. I want it to reach people who are like first time viewers, people who don't watch AEW, people who just like, still think wrestling is real. Like I want it to reach like every single type of fan. I don't
Mm.
want it to just be like the super hardcores. Obviously, by its nature, um, this is definitely a hardcore fan sampling, but I do think we did a good job reaching more new people within the realm of feasibility, and I think that's bared out in these results.
Yeah, I think it's important to look. Already, you have a really good sample, right? You have a tremendous sample. Typically, like 1,000 people. Usually, when you're doing these type of omnibus style surveys, is a fantastic sample. So you're closer to 2,000 to begin with. That's fantastic. But yes, like as far as sample quality, that's the other question, right? The sample quantity, but then there's the quality as well. Having a wider range of perspectives and opinions is really, really crucial and makes the numbers all the more interesting then. And maybe also this this rise as well, maybe could be. Should we construe it with the ongoing narrative that AEW's business is doing better, that overall people feel like there's more and more people watching AEW in general? Is it then a coincidence that there are more people answering the survey then? I mean, that's just, it's a hypothesis that I'm putting out there. I'm not saying that's the question.
Yeah, it's
That's the answer,
possible.
but it's possible.
It's possible. We looked at like there's one piece of this that I think is kind of interesting. Well, actually, there's a couple, but one of the responses that I find interesting every year is, I ask people, did they attend a live event this past year? And we get fans that say that they did attend a show. They attended one locally. We also get fans that tell us that they traveled to a show outside their area, such as a pay-per-view, or like the shows in Forbidden Door in London or things like that, that are big kind of international draws. There's also people that just live in areas where AEW did not come to their area. Obviously, most international markets don't get an AEW show
Sure.
each year. But then there's another sub piece of the equation, which is the 21% of fans who said that AEW came to their area, but they did not attend.
Right.
Now, last year, that number was a little bit higher. It's at 23%. So there was a
Mm,
2% reduction in fans who decided to go to a show instead of not going. Um,
right.
so what does that mean? Does that make the show, does that mean what is there something about the show that has been more appealing? Um, but the other thing, Warren, that's really important, I find honestly the most important thing about this survey that churns up every year is to never put AEW fans in a box. Never assume they all like the same thing. Never assume they're all turned off by the same thing. And so much discussion around AEW is, a pundit pointing their finger and saying, this is what AEW needs to do, or this is what AEW shouldn't do. And it's mostly shaped by their own opinions. What the data here tells us is that AEW fans have really a wide range and diversity of how they feel about certain things. Um, and there are some common shared answers on here, but there's so much diversity, even amongst what we would consider to be a hardcore AEW fan demographic, which are the people that filled out the survey. So that's like really, I think the most important thing is that like we tend, and everyone's guilty of this, including myself, like of just kind of being like, well, AEW really needs to do this to keep, these fans happy, or they can't do this because it will turn off a bunch of fans.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I feel like that's like when we do analysis like that, that's incredibly unspecific because you never really know what's going to turn off an individual fan or what's going to get an individual fan more excited about the product. And it can range from a really wide variety of things.
Right. And I'm going to tell you, there's a couple of results in that vein. I guess we'll eventually get into them because I'm going to follow your flow here, Jesse. But there's a couple of things that popped up here that surprised me. That really did surprise me. And things that I had, let's say my gut was telling me that that we were in this environment. Not only necessarily showed that my gut was right, but was overwhelmingly correct. Like I was even surprised that my instincts were that good. But yeah, there is a wide variety of things that AEW fans enjoy. And look, I mean, it's why don't we get into it? Because in talking, but right now we're all, I'm talking in
Code, yeah.
vagaries. Yeah, so we might as well just get into it
Okay.
then.
So the first question I ask is, when did AEW fans start watching the promotion, right? When did they first start tuning into AEW? And like every year, the results um pretty much stay, I think, roughly the same. 65% of people said that they started watching AEW when it first started, and then a further 23% said a further 6% said in the first year of AEW. So a majority of our fans are what we would consider to be like lifelong AEW fans. They've been following the promotion for
Right.
its entire existence. Um, Another, 23%, the other largest piece of that answer group, have started watching between 2020 and 2024. So then we're getting kind of like the end of the first year, the pandemic. I think like CM Punk and Bryan Danielson coming into the company brought some new fans on board. And that is really where AEW's fan base is. They're only realistically going to grow, I would say, incrementally, in the subsequent years. Since they're kind of we're now, and it also hammers home the fact that we are far, far beyond like the honeymoon phase, the launch phase, anything you want to
Hmm.
do. These kind of terms we used to talk about AEW a few years ago, that's over. AEW is now into its, I would say, like its third or fourth generation of a wrestling company, as opposed to being this new exciting thing.
Right. And it, it also shows that this survey is being answered by the dedicated hardcore fan base, right? The people who are responding are the people who are there, consume, watch, of course, watch as much, we can assume as much programming as they can. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but these are people who have been committed from day one, the majority of the respondents here. So that's also really, really interesting.
Yeah, and then of course there's the 5% of people who said that they have watched AEW in the past year. We're going to hold on to those people because we're going to talk about them at the end of this show.
Right.
I did some follow-up research with those people, which I found really fascinating because, like I said at the beginning, when I talk about so many people project their own feelings towards what AEW needs to do to be successful. I went out and talked to some people who started watching the product in the past year and got what has hooked them on the product. What are their impressions of AEW? And actually got a limited amount, but of data to kind of tell us a little bit in perspectives to educate us on what is attracting new fans to AEW. How are they finding out about the product? So we'll talk about that in a bit. The next thing I asked was, how much AEW are they watching compared to last year? And kind of similar percentages. I think 66% of people said that they watched the same amount of AEW, and 16% said they watch less, and 15% said they watch more. So that basically tells us that people, I would say in general, people are watching about the same amount of AEW in
Yeah.
totality. Some people are getting burned out, but some people are also getting more interested, and those two parties seem to balance each other out. So we're at about what I would say like an equal watching period.
And I think when we start digging in and seeing the more open ended answers that the survey provided, I think you can absolutely point to people deciding to stop watching Collision, equating to that slice of the pie where there are less people watching AEW. I think that you see this pop up quite a bit within the survey of people just like saying, "Well, I stopped watching Collision because." Collision wasn't all that exciting anymore. I didn't feel it necessarily had any stakes, no impact really on the promotion as a whole. So I just dumped that uh, out of my purview, right? Um, so yeah, I think that's what you can directly equate to the percentage of people who are saying, yeah, no, I decided to watch less. I think there's a direct line right there.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the last questions I ask is, and we'll talk about this several times throughout this podcast, but I ask fans, what is one thing they'd like to see changed about AEW? And Collision's importance to the viewer was
Yeah.
something that came up frequently in terms of people wish Collision was more important to them, wish Collision was maybe formatted a little bit differently than Dynamite, which I think actually Collision is formatted a little bit differently than Dynamite. And Tony has come out and said that he doesn't think when he comes to Collision, he doesn't focus too much on like, oh, is this thing going to do a good quarter hour rating or not, as he might for Dynamite. He
Right.
does it a little bit more loosely. But I think fans want a reason to watch Collision. And the reality is that yes, stuff happens on Collision, and if something big happens on Collision, it's never too difficult, at least for me, to go back and watch it. but
Mhm.
Collision is not a have to slash must watch piece of programming each week. And I think
No,
some fans wish it was.
it doesn't have it doesn't have the gravitas that comes with the flagship show, where you like all the important stuff is happening there. That's where all the biggest stars are going to be. And I think there's also this idea that I think there's also the idea that Collision being taped. I saw that on a couple of occasions too. Like I have a quote here from one of the respondents. Well, not from the respondents, but from what I gathered from the respondents, excuse me, basically saying that fans treat Collision as skippable essentially when it's taped, right? That always plays a part as to whether or not it feels must watch, which ties in historically too in pro wrestling in general. Ever since wrestling started doing live TV, you will recall all the way back in the days, back in the 90s when Raw was taped every other week. Well, systematically, the taped Raw would do a little worse in the ratings on Monday nights than for a live one. So I think a lot of this, I think there's a part of it where it's like if part of the pleasure of watching wrestling, part of the experience is having the idea that the unpredictable might be happening just before me, and if I miss it, I'm going to miss it, right? If I'm there, I'll be there to watch it happen as it's happening. Whereas a taped event is more like, oh well, plus on top of that, there's also the connotation that the taped event will not have important things happening on it, whereas the live one has a higher chance of surprises and the title changes or whatever. There's always that connotation that happens there, and I think it trickles down even to this day, even today in this era where, like you said yourself, Collision is not hard to find if you want to go back and watch it. Any type of programming, really, with a streaming service, you can go back and watch it at your convenience anytime. But yet people are like, even if you can watch it at any time, it seems like pro wrestling fans still will make the choice. They will prefer to watch their wrestling show live first and foremost, and then anything taped will be secondary or just like completely shed, forgotten, tossed away.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about the responses when they talk about it is that um, pretty much nobody says, I want Rampage to come back. Basically, there were no
No.
responses saying that they want Rampage to come back. So they're not looking for more AEW necessarily. However, I got
That's a good point. That's a good point. That's like because it's not as if fans are saying we don't want Rampage. Excuse me, we don't want Collision, right? They're saying give us a reason to watch Collision.
yes. No one's like, there's too much TV and I can't follow
Right.
it. It's more like I want Collision to have more of a purpose for me. What I did find interesting is that there were a number of responses where people said, like I said, no one really wanted Rampage back, but a lot of people said that they wanted to see AEW Dark back, which I do find interesting because you want to talk about something that's like really inessential and you definitely don't have to watch. It's AEW Dark. But there clearly
Mhm.
was a portion of the fan base that really liked watching that style of a wrestling show where it was very relaxed and it was mostly squash matches and it was a chance to see undercard acts and things like that. And that was interesting to me because while it is not like an important show from like a storyline perspective, and it doesn't have any real star power, which you would think is what people want to see out of Collision. But it was formatted completely differently than like your typical, Dynamite is. It wasn't like a version of Dynamite. It was a totally different type of show, and there is some people that really seem to gravitate towards that.
Do you think it also correlates with another criticism that I mean, we're jumping around all over the place here, but
Yeah, you can. No,
uh,
feel free. Don't. Just say whatever you want. That's fine.
do we think that this might correlate to Another criticism that appears within the survey that about roster size.
Hmm.
Maybe the idea of these, dark, having like, I don't know, 8 or 9 matches on a dark, but they're all like 2 minute squashes. And then you get to see all the people that don't get featured, right, on Dynamite and Collision because the TV time is so critical. And, so then you get to see these acts that people always wonder, well, what about this person? What about that? Maybe those two go together. Maybe this would be a way to alleviate some of the criticisms that the roster is too big, that we never get to see everyone. Maybe bringing back something like Dark would be beneficial for that. Maybe that'd help scratch an itch.
Yeah, sorry, the cat is doing a run-in right now. So if anyone hears anything, I say I'm apologizing, but I know people actually love hearing that stuff. So if you hear any loud meowing, because he's actually pretty close to the microphone right now, or purring,
It
that's
might
gonna
be me
be,
too. You never know.
yeah, it could be Warren. Warren makes those noises too.
Ah,
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, roster size is really interesting. Some people are more just like the roster is too big, gotta cut people, and other people are like the roster is great, I want to see more of these people. And there's a limit to TV time, and there's a limit to, creative energy that you can have. You can't have 500 storylines going on and have them all mean something. Um, and it puts a cap on kind of. I don't think there's a like. I honestly like we've been talking about this pretty much since like I don't think when AEW first started, anyone said the roster is too big. But like probably like within a year of the company, every people started saying the roster is too big. So we've been talking about this for almost the entire existence of the company. And honestly, I don't know if there's like a sweet spot that you can hit between roster size, roster utilization, because I would say that most people would say, the AEW roster is pretty big. They can trim some guys, which is probably true. But you also have to think about injuries and
mhm.
talent getting unhappy and just, other, competitors in the market who might be looking for talent. And there's just all these extra aspects that make AEW having the roster as big as it is kind of a necessity, even if you're never going to really be able to like showcase all of it at the same time. And I just think that that's like just I think it's something that we just have to accept as like wrestling fans at this point. That's something that's going to happen with the company.
I mean, we talk about it with AEW, but we talk about it, especially, year pre-pandemic, we talk about it with WWE at the time as well. And they were hoarding talent when there wasn't even competition hanging around, right? If anything, if anything, there's a better case for roster bloat these days with two major televised national companies. Basically, the term gets thrown around, basically in an arms race for talent. It kind of makes more sense now to get these big bloated rosters than it was in 2017 when WWE had 170 people or so on the roster, and they were the only game in town. So yeah, I mean, what is the sweet spot? Like you said it yourself, what is the sweet spot? If there's too many factors to consider, and what are you going to do? With a roster that size, it's inevitable that maybe your favorite won't be featured as often, or maybe this one up and comer who got signed that you were really excited for, you won't be seeing him or her regularly on television. That is also a possibility. That's just, I think it's part and parcel, really.
Yeah, and especially if they're not a male singles wrestler, like if they are a women's
Yeah.
wrestler or like a tag team, they're pretty much going to be seen like within the context of whether they're how close they are to the respective titles in those divisions. And
Hmm.
you might not see them for a few months um,
Yep.
on TV. I also asked, so part of the survey, I asked people if they had reduced or stopped watching AEW in the past year, what was the reason for why they decided to do that? And again, there's a lot of diversity of answers, right? Some people said, I'm just not that interested in the product. Or I feel like the storylines weren't really grabbing me. I wasn't like super into any of the wrestlers, and so I just stopped watching. Other people just say I'm too busy. A lot of people, it's funny because some people get really like open with their responses. Like some people are like, oh, I got diagnosed with cancer and it just took up too much of my time and I just didn't have the energy to get into the wrestling. And I'm like, oh wow. Or, oh, I just had a kid and then my wife lost her job and like all this, like people give really detailed stuff. So uh there's a lot of reasons that people stop watching. It's not entirely all product related, but I think the thing that AEW can control from like a learning perspective has to be product related. And I think a lot of that, if we're looking at people who stopped watching, um, I think that like booking stagnation was a common answer. Like people just feeling like I felt like the wrestlers I liked weren't able to climb up the card as quickly
Mhm.
or as purposeful as I wanted to. So I think that kind of across the board in terms of a criticism, that's something that popped up a lot in the open-ended responses.
Yeah, yeah. Having had access to the data was kind of surprising. That was kind of a point I wanted to make. How open, how much of an open book some people are with their reasons. I'm like, okay, that's you really didn't have to go this far,
Yeah,
but
I learned some stuff about people's personal lives that I didn't expect to learn.
you're like, yeah, you're like, good, all right. You could
Look,
have
and
just
I'd
told me.
rather have people overshare than undershare when you're collecting information. I always say this
Sure.
whenever I'm interviewing somebody and they're like, "Oh, sorry, I talked too much." And I'm like, "I'd much rather have someone talk too much than too little or not at all."
Than the opposite. I agree. But yeah, you look into those factors, and yeah, I mean, anything that AEW can control to retain their viewership is that's entirely up to them. I think that I think overall AEW, particularly in the past, particularly since I would say since November last year, have been fantastic in creating an environment that started to feel like it was must watch again, started to feel like things were humming and everything made sense and things connected and you felt like there was an end game to everything. I felt like the booking, the creative was incredibly strong. And I think it contributed to this space that the company is in right now, where we can argue and talk shop about business metrics, but it's hard to deny that AW doesn't have a buzz right now, that there's not a positive sentiment going around AEW now. And there's a lot of choices that they made in that direction as well. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, you bring that up,
It's
Warren,
all on
because
them.
the next question I asked was, do fans think AEW has gotten better over the past year? And so 65% of fans said that they do think AEW has gotten better, while 27.5% said that they think AEW is about the same as it was last year. Only
Mhm.
4.6% said that they thought AEW was worse than it was last year. So overall, this is a strong vote, I think, of confidence in the direction of AEW. Last year, we got similar kind of results, but last year's survey is interesting because it was taken right around the same time last year. So it was like right after Revolution 2025, which if people remember is one of the most highly critically received pay-per-views in AEW history. The exception being the Mox versus Copeland match that main
Right.
evented, which people did not like. But basically everything else on that show was greatly enjoyed, and people felt like the company had turned a corner from what would be considered a weak 2024. So there was a lot of optimism that the company was on the upswing around the
Mhm.
time period that this survey was given out last year. So the fact that they largely retained that optimism for this year, that people still feel like a year has gone by and the company is still on an upward trajectory in terms of their view and the overall quality of the product that's being presented, I think is significant, and I think that's a great sign for AEW. And the fact that very few people seem to be, only 4.5% seem to say that they think the product is in any way worse than it was last year is a great sign for a company.
And I think it's representative of 2025 in general. I think I think overall AEW fans all agree that 2025 was a very good year for the company. It started off really, really rough. January, February. I feel like once the company had passed the Grand Slam Australia show, I feel like after that hump, things really started to pick up. things really started to pick up when Mox was finally done with the Adam Copeland stuff. I think there's also a general consensus around fans that the build to All In was extremely good. May have been a couple of softer months after, in September, October, but then guess what? Continental Classic kicks in November, and then and it picks up speed. Everyone gets. I thought the Continental Classic on top of that was excellent in 2025. Carried that momentum right into the new year with and right into 2026 with some excellent stuff. So I from a personal level, I think I 100% agree with the majority view here that AEW was better, was better than the year before. Yeah, you will have to. I'm already excited to talk about 2026 because I feel we're already on a really good upswing. Currently, if they can maintain that momentum, we might get another big piece of the pie of people saying that it was better than that it was even better than 2025.
Yeah, I think anecdotally, like if you were to ask me what I thought the results for this poll would be before I got any of this information, I would say a lot of people think the product is better than it was
Yeah.
last year. And a lot of that comes down to like 2024 being seen as kind of a weaker year, and that 2025, the past 365 days, was largely built, I think, like rebuilding some trust from the fan base that had waned.
Hmm.
And I think it was an important learning year that like AEW is a company that is, if it's in it for the long haul, and it seems like it's going to be, it's going to have ups and downs. We're going to have really strong years and we're going to have weaker years. And there's going to be all sorts of circumstances that change the way each year is going to go. Maybe some people get injured. Maybe you have a crazy personnel issue like you did with CM Punk. Maybe Tony's creative is really bad. Like it's going to change. We've seen every wrestling company have up and downs. Look at WWE, look at New Japan, look at CMLL, look at any company that's been around for decades and decades. They have really good years and then really bad years. And that's going to happen to AEW too. It's not going to be this like on like it's not going to be on the same trajectory every single year. And right now it feels like we're in an upswing. In a couple years, Warren, we could be in a downswing. And if that does happen, hopefully the survey will bear that information out as well.
Sure, absolutely. I think that look, I just think that AEW last year was able to really zero in on what its fan base was looking for. Because look, I have a quote here, a real quote this time from one of the responses from someone who said, I think AEW does a really good job of having a wide variety of styles and personalities, exposing me to international wrestling and comedy wrestling and a little bit of everything. And it's a very wide ranging comment, but nonetheless, like there's, the fact that they're talking about being exposed to international wrestling, right? And a variety of styles and personalities. There was some kind of sweet spot that I think was hit in 2025 that the fans really appreciated, and that some fans were open to discovery at the same time, to the point that they made a note of it here in the survey, which is non-negligible. So yeah, there's definitely some good self-reflection happening, and probably due to a lot of people criticizing previous decisions, but lifting. It was kind of imperative that that AEW, wow, what a leap there. It was kind of imperative that AEW lifts itself out of 2023, right? The post CM Punk era, the post Brawl Out era. That was a period that really was heavy to bear, right? It weighed down everything to a degree, and it was really, really important that the company showed that it can move on from this, and that we don't have to live under the specter of this event. And 2024 struggled with that, and 2025 was kind of like the consecration of, yeah, you know what? We've moved on. The company that existed 2 years ago, where all of that happened, is no longer here. this is what we are moving forward. Forget about the past. And I think that was crucial.
We already talked a little bit about the attendance kind of factor when I asked fans if they attended an AEW show, but I wanted to bring up again like the 21.6% of fans who responded that AEW had came to their area in the past year, but they did not attend. I think that's a really fascinating group of fans that we can learn something from, right? Or if you're an AEW from a business perspective, here are fans that say that they watch the product, but for whatever reason, when AEW was coming to their city, they didn't go to the show.
Hmm.
And what are some of the factors that play into that? Now, I think the most obvious one anyone say would be, I wasn't interested because the show didn't seem exciting to me.
Right.
Which I think is probably the number one thing that you can control if you're AEW. Like, let's load up the card and make it exciting. Let's make the product better. Let's make it more
Yes.
appealing to fans to attend live. But there's also so many different other reasons that prevent people from going to the show. And again, like much when we talked about people who stopped watching the show, we got a wide variety of answers, which I found kind of interesting. Like one person said, this was common for West Coast people saying, I got off work too late to make the start of the show because these
Hmm.
tapings, because they're happening on East Coast time or for prime time on the East Coast, a show that starts 8 on the East Coast is starting at 5 p.m. on the West Coast, which is going to be really difficult for anyone that works, normal working hours to be able to attend the show without moving their schedule around. Um, so like that's something. Somebody mentioned that, the ticket price, Ticketmaster, fees were too expensive and that's why they didn't, get the tickets this time. Someone said that no wheelchair accessible seating was listed on the booking site, which is something that like I have never heard before, but is an interesting, anecdotal
That's
point
wild.
that might be preventing somebody from who wants to attend the show, that maybe that's something that could be solved relatively easily that hasn't been brought to AW's attention.
That's wild. Like honestly, it's wild that a venue running in 2026 doesn't have any wheelchair access. That's kind of crazy to me. These of course are factors that are, well, they're outside of AW's control to a degree because they could pick venues that do have,
Well, I think it's just
access.
not listed. So this person said they're from Massachusetts. So I probably went to the show that they are talking about, and they definitely have accessible seating at these venues
Right.
because it's either the MGM Fenway show, which is a brand new arena inside Fenway Park,
Right.
or the Agganis Arena show, which is on the Boston University's campus, which they've been to plenty of times before, and is a very standard arena that I know for a fact has wheelchair accessible seating.
So okay.
It's the fact that
Okay.
it's not listed is
Sure.
preventing this person from going because they're not going to buy a ticket that if they don't know that there's actual seating there. So as someone that's been to the venues, I mean I don't need the handicap seating, but I can say with a lot of confidence that it does exist, but the fact that information isn't available on the booking site might be preventing someone. And when you think about like this is someone who by like the nature of their response, like literally was like adding the tickets to their cart at the time. Like this is someone who is clearly going to buy tickets, but decided against it because of this issue that seems like something that could be easily corrected.
But it seems so, yeah. But I think I would say that the main problem, or the main, I would say that the main issue would be the card not being exciting, right? Look, it's no surprise for anyone who follows AEW on a regular basis. They've struggled throughout 2025 to get people into venues for the weekly tapings. We're not talking about the pay-per-views. We're talking about the weeklies. They've always struggled. And a lot of us just point to the fact that, that for the longest time, you never really quite knew who was going to show up on a Dynamite, right? Who was going to be there. If
Yeah,
you
not
compare
until the
that to
day of the show do
until
you
the day
really
of the
know.
show.
Yeah.
But like even in the case of WWE, right? Let's say comparatively to WWE, if you go to, let's say, a Monday Night Raw and Roman Reigns is on the Raw roster. I'm just saying, like, I'm creating somewhat of a hypothetical because I don't know who's on which roster where in WWE these days. But Roman Reigns is on the Raw roster. Seth Rollins, Becky Lynch. Well, you will know that at the very least they are going to show up on the show, whether they wrestle or not. That's one thing that WWE understands, is that people pay money. They want to see the stars. They want to see Cody. They want to see CM Punk on their respective nights, on the respective shows, and they're going to be there, whether it's in a backstage segment, a match, an in-ring promo, or a mixture of those. At the very least, you are going to see the top guys. Um, you're you're never quite sure if Kenny Omega is going to be on a Dynamite. You just never know. You never know if MJF is going to be on one, or the Hangman, or Swerve, or Willow. The only wrestler up until recently, of course, that I feel like they were very, very consistent. They being AEW were very, very consistent with for showing up on Wednesday nights was Tony Storm. Tony was, and John Moxley, of course, but Tony Storm comes to mind because she is just bustling with popularity. She's one of the top acts in the company. So they made sure to put her on Dynamite every week, whether it's in the ring or not. I think ultimately that was one thing that helped to erode the confidence of the ticket buying public, was that you were never quite sure who was going to be on a Dynamite. You're paying to see the top people, but you weren't guaranteed that you were going to that the top people were going to be there. And that's, I think, something that also they can easily control and remedy.
Yeah, and it's part of having the big roster, which you talked about. It's part of having like
Correct.
Collision and saving some stuff for Collision, and sometimes Collision is in the same venue that they tape right after Dynamite, like they did on Wednesday night. So it's like, did it really matter that like, FTR weren't on Dynamite when they were just on Collision? Like those fans are still getting those tickets, but we don't see, I think there's a lack of consistency compared to WWE, and it definitely hurts them from a live attendance
Yeah.
perspective. I'll be honest, Warren, I'm going to zag a little bit here. I kind of like that we have no idea what we're going to see on Dynamite each week. It makes the show feel so much more alive and interesting, as opposed to the WWE system, which is like churning through the same tired 4 or 5 acts that are going to be on the show every week, that are in some time-filling segment because they're trying to get to the next thing. I like that, like, we don't know we're going to see Pac on an episode of
Sure.
Dynamite or not. We don't know if Kevin Knight is going to have a match. Like, to me, as a fan, that is more exciting, but I totally understand why is dissuading from somebody who is thinking about attending a live show and is like, I don't really know who's going to be on this show. It happened to me.
Well,
There was a New Japan show, not an AEW show, but it's the same thing. There was a New Japan show, and it was going to be in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is about an hour or
right.
so north of where I live. And I was just like, they announced the names for the show, you know, in the lead up, and it was like a lot of like not particularly exciting names. There wasn't a lot of star power. And
The
then like,
strong guys, the guys, the New Japan strong guys.
yeah, and then in
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the last week of the show, they announced like all these, basically all of the key New Japan talent was actually going to be on the show. And I had already made plans to do something else that weekend, so I was like, well, I really wish they had announced this earlier in advance, because now I really want to go to the show. Um, And I feel like that's probably the case for a number of AEW fans who are saying, like, yeah, I just don't know who's going to be on this show. The only saving grace, I think, now is that Dynamite in particular is pretty much consistently a really, really good show. And if you
Mhm.
do go, you're probably going to see a high quality wrestling show. But if you are really like in it to because you're a really hardcore fan of a few different talents and you're not that enthused about a lot of the other talents, you're not going to go to these shows unless you know they're going to appear, and that's something that's often not the case from an information perspective.
Well, I'll zag back with 2 points. Um, when I say who's not, we don't know who's going to be on the show and whatnot. You mentioned Kevin Knight, for instance, right? Well, I don't know how many people are holding back buying a ticket as to whether or not Kevin Knight is going to be on the show. Nothing against Kevin Knight. I love Kevin Knight. He's a tremendous wrestler, but I don't think he's cracked that ceiling of being a guy that people will immediately plunk down money to see, right? As opposed to, let's say, well, I don't know if Will Ospreay is going to be there. If Will Ospreay is going to be on the card, I'm going to go because Will Ospreay is a star, right? Same thing with Kenny Omega. Same thing with the Hangman or even MJF. I think there's a difference between not being sure if Speedball Mike Bailey is going to be there or Kenny Omega. I think there's one that's a clear attraction. The other, while you might leave the show being a little disappointed that you didn't get to see Speedball. You'd be like, well, at least Kenny was there and he was awesome, type of thing. And the second point of that I want to bring up then is this a question then of booking for TV versus booking for your audience, for your live audience? I mean, because you brought it, like, your point about WWE just churning out the same thing every week is absolutely correct. That is the downside of having like this assurance that all the stars are going to be there. It's then every week the show feels the same from a television perspective. Because if you're plunking down the money to go see a show, well, you want to see the stars. You want to see the top people of the company live in front of you. That's the attraction. Again, nothing against Kevin Knight, who's going to go out and have an extremely hot match, but there's a difference between him and having Kenny Omega come out. But no one watching, but if you're at home watching on TV, you're like, weird that they didn't put Kevin Knight on TV this week, right? Because you're at home watching TV and you didn't pay for the ticket, you didn't pay for parking, you didn't, all the things that imply that are involved in going to a show. I think it's the duality and probably the real complex situation that exists when booking these cards is like, well, on one hand, we have to do something exciting to draw people to buy tickets. And then on the other hand, well, we got to keep our home audience excited. And, and at the same time, that's where the big money is as well. That's where the media deal lies. So that's why we're not bookers, Jesse. That's why we don't own our own promotions, because it's likely, because it is not only likely, but it is a lot more complicated than we think.
Yeah, Triple H was right when he told us, sarcastically asked us how our territories were doing, because they're non-existent, because we're just internet marks. I think, like, for AEW also, like, the key is AEW's identity as a challenger brand, as an alternative to WWE. It actually is important. Like, WWE is undisputably better at making their few chosen individual wrestlers like feel like bigger stars within their promotion, because of how much they focus on a CM Punk or a Roman Reigns or a Cody Rhodes type character, how clearly established they are above the rest of the people on the roster, how they're given multiple segments for every show that they're on. And like you said, the kind of guarantee that you're going to see them every single week on Raw or SmackDown, depending on what brand they're on, which is the benefit of the brand extension too, because you kind of can say, like, you shouldn't really expect Cody Rhodes to be on Raw because everyone knows he's a SmackDown guy, and
Sure.
so forth. And so that's like better from a business perspective, certainly for WWE. But I think for AEW, it actually helps them feel different, that the show is less reliant on a handful of individuals that have been on television for the past 10 or 15 years. That
I agree. I
it's
100%
better for
agree.
so I think something that's good for WWE might not be good for AEW, even though like traditional pro wrestling logic tells us like it's all about star power. It's all about having that huge babyface drawing star. I think that kind of mentality, I think that's different for AEW. I think that anytime a wrestler, and it's bared out actually in a lot of these responses, like some people don't like that John Moxley or MJF have a lot of segments on Dynamite. They're like, we need to see less of this person and more of X, Y, or Z. And I do think that's a big part of AEW is that fact that they're not as focused on, two or three handpicked top stars. They have,
Mhm.
they definitely have their own kind of echelon of top stars, but it's not nearly as like disciplined as WWE's. Um,
Yeah. Look, and look, it boils down to this. Would you say, Jesse, that AW's mid card is better than WWE's?
oh, 100%.
So there you go. Like that, you have it right there. It's like that locks into a lot of stuff that pops up in the survey and that we talked about because of in regards to roster size and whatnot. People want to see the mid card because the mid card is compelling. The mid card is good. You look, you yourself, you used examples about people showing up on the show being those people are mid carders effectively. I was talking about the tippy top guys, and you were talking about the mid carders. But there's,
Well,
I'm not even
to
disagreeing
be
with you.
fair, I said that because I thought like guys like Moxley or MJF like have been on the shows pretty consistently. Like I feel like if you go to
Sure.
Dynamite this week, and obviously it's a pay-per-view go home show, so you're gonna definitely see them. But I picked guys who are more sporadic in their appearances for a reason. But yeah, sorry, continue.
But nonetheless, no. But I mean, nonetheless, it still proves it goes to the point where it's like, well, we want to see these people because they're exciting, they're fresh, because the mid card is well booked, because there's even the lower mid card stuff, even the stuff like more at the bottom. Everything has like stories and angles, and there's even if it's more throwaway, not as invested, there's still stuff going on. I mean that to me is a strong suit of the past year, and is a way is definitely a way to explain, like you said, how the different how what might be good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander. With WWE focusing on the top heavy side of things, AEW feels more like an ensemble cast. How about that for an analogy?
Yeah, getting a little. Are you a theater kid, Warren?
Oh God, yes.
He said that. He said shamefully. No
Yes,
judgment
yes, I
here.
was.
I'm not. I was in a. I did do the crew for a stage production of The Wiz in
Oh,
seventh grade. Yeah.
I no, I was in a few things when I was old enough to know better. Let's put it that way. No, no, I was actually really good. I did I did a lot of uh, I did a lot of stuff. I did some Eugenia Ionesco. I did some Arthur Miller. Did the Crucible at one point. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
so yeah,
I
you
was
you
very
did real
much
dramatic acting. Like,
yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think
on
actually
top of that,
it's
and on top of that, I did I was in an improv troupe. On top of that, so yeah, I was running the gamut back then. The '90s were wild.
one of the things we asked this every year is what do fans like and dislike about the AW product? So if you didn't take the survey, basically there's a menu with a bunch of boxes you can check off whether you generally like something about AW or subsequently if you dislike that thing about AW. And the results don't vary too much year to year, but it's worth noting in general. So obviously, the one thing that pretty much every single person that filled this survey out can agree on, all 1,700 of them, the thing that they like about AEW is the in-ring product, the
Hmm.
wrestling. It's where the best wrestle. And that's not really a surprise to anyone that watches the promotion. The company's heavily focused on putting together exciting, fun, engaging, excellent professional wrestling matches. It's how the roster is constructed, it's how the promotion is booked around. That is And it's important because, as the survey shows, that is AEW's bread and butter. That is what's attracting fans. That is what is bringing fans into arenas. That is what keeps people invested in AEW. It's what they like about AEW more than they like about WWE, because that comes up a lot too. It is all about the in-ring product. And I bring that up because I think it's important when we're talking critically about like things AEW can control. I think every single kind of move, whether that is comes down to a hiring a wrestler or thinking about what kind of angle you're going to produce, if like in-ring action is not at the forefront of that angle, or if that wrestler you're hiring is not somebody who's going to be able to cut it up to the standard that the promotion has set for itself in terms of in-ring performance, that is something that might jeopardize what appeals most to your fans,
Yep.
the heart and soul of this company, which is the in-ring product. And I think that is something that AEW has to be conscious of when it comes to making decisions. So, like to use an example, and I personally, me, Jesse Collins, do not have any strong feelings whatsoever on this. But like when you bring in a tag team like the Iconics, like that is going to be something because it's like this is two women's wrestlers who are not up to the in-ring standard set by the rest of the roster, and that is something
Right.
that is against what AEW's calling card is.
I mean, you saw we saw the response to it, online where most AEW fans, outside, let's move aside from those who had some weird vitriol about it, but just there's a lot of people who just outright said, "Huh, that's strange." Like and maybe some people couldn't exactly put their finger on it, couldn't exactly point it out and said, but at the very least, they felt out of place in the environment that was created in AEW, I think I think it's just, I think it's a good way of going about it. But yeah, look at it, a lot of the responses, in the open-ended answers would talk a lot about how AEW would put on really entertaining, high quality matches. Some people would say, like, I have one here that says that AEW has a lot of really entertaining and high quality matches that make you unable to turn your eyes from the screen. The wrestlers themselves are really good and can also be really funny. So so they're a little tidbit of comedy there, but that's a sentiment that we get quite a bit in the results, where people are just like, look, you just can't look away, right? And if we're talking about broader television developments or trends that are maybe simmering in the background, you hear oftentimes, especially when it comes to Netflix, how they want to create a second screen experience, right? We've heard about this going around, and you kind of wonder how something like AEW would translate to that, if the idea is to if fans feel like their eyes are glued to the screen during a match and just can't look away. How is that translating into some potential new TV trends where, no, we actually want you to stop watching, keep your eyes off the screen so that you can, tweet or, do whatever other interactive tomfoolery we're going to come up with, that just projecting into the future here, but it's still interesting, right? It's still super, super interesting that fans are just like, yeah, we just really like watching professional wrestling matches because they're entertaining, engaging, and fun.
Yep. And if you have the kind of roster that AEW has, which has done such a tremendous job at collecting excellent in-ring performers, it is something that can bring a level of consistency that you can't get from like storylines and booking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like we're seeing it right now with WWE, right? Like WWE clearly a couple years ago had some storylines that were really interesting to their fan base. And now we're seeing in 2026, they don't have those storylines, and fans are tuning out of the product, and WrestleMania is struggling to sell tickets and all of this stuff. And it's because it's like a hot storyline or hot angle is going to cool off. really good wrestling maybe doesn't like peak as high from a business perspective as like an incredible angle or something like that or a hot storyline, but it brings a level of consistency to your product that you can kind of always lean on. There have been plenty of, AEW pay-per-views that didn't necessarily have like super, super hot angles going into them, but people still feel confident, and it's reflected in the real consistency that they get from pay-per-view buys month to month or from event to event that people trust. Like, you know what? Even if there's not something that like an incredible, culmination of a 5 year storyline or something like that, like to use like a Hangman Page beating John Moxley and winning the world title or something like that. Um, Even if we're not going to have that, we're going to have um, some really really excellent wrestling, and the show is going to be worth my time even if there's no storylines there. So that's something that's really important with the in-ring product is brings a level of consistency when it's as good as AEW's is. Even Dynamite, like we can say like, oh, I don't know what stars are going to be on Dynamite, but like it's very rare you turn on a Dynamite and there's not at least one like really good wrestling match. Usually there's more than one.
No, absolutely, absolutely. The consistency on that front makes it. I find it makes wrestling. It makes it better to watch, in my opinion, because oddly enough, Jesse, when I sit down to watch professional wrestling, that's kind of what I expect to watch. So if it's good on top of that, it makes it all better. Yeah, I mean, there's no disagreement. What was the pay-per-view last year that AEW had put on, and there wasn't much of a build to it? Was it? What was the one? Shoot, what's the pay per view just before Full Gear, the October one?
I'm
I
so
want
bad with my pay-per-views. I think you're thinking of Wrestle Dream though.
Well, I'm pretty. Wasn't it Wrestle Dream 2025? And I'm just gonna make sure here by pulling up the old cage
I'll tell
match
you
here.
what. I'll tell you what, Warren, and I am
Yeah.
so bad at like remembering these pay-per-view cards and what was on them and what happened. I have no idea. If you were like, "Hey Jesse, what happened at um, you know, Double or Nothing 2023?" I'm like, I couldn't tell you who was the champion. I couldn't tell you what the main event was, who won, anything that happened on the show. If I look at the card, I'll be able, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh, I remember that was really
Right, right,
good."
right.
But other than that, I like what happened at Wrestle Dream. I'm looking it up too because I have no idea what it was.
No, me too. I was pulling it up because it's crazy to me. And we hang around the same people, you and I. And there are some people, their brains are like traps for that kind of stuff. They'll just pull up the information off the top of their noggin, and I just sit there impressed and
I'm
feel
now looking at
oddly
it's so
insecure.
it's so funny. I'm looking at the card now, and I'm like, the main event was the Darby Allin versus John Moxley I Quit match, and that was my match of the year last year.
There you go. But to the point though, Wrestle Dream 2025, like was probably one of these pay-per-views, the builds where the build wasn't anything like what wasn't like a top to bottom thing that was so tightly held together. It was one of those where you just came in, they just had awesome matches, and a pay-per-view that on paper looked good, but everyone was sort of going, well, we'll see how it goes. And it just turned out to be like this outstanding show, one of the best shows of the year, one of AEW's B shows, right? Ended up being one of the best pay-per-views of the year, regardless, all promotions put together. And yeah, it just goes to show, like, you put Jamie Hayter and Tekla in a match and it kicks ass. You put FTR versus Jet Speed in a match and it kicks ass. Darby Allin and Moxley in an I Quit match. Well, that goes without saying, but you can do just about anything, and it's good. Everything's going to turn out really, really great to excellent.
And then another one of the top responses here, which got a lot in terms of like a majority share, which is over like pretty much close to 90% of respondents said that they enjoyed the wrestlers and the characters, which is a little bit different than the in-ring product. And something that I think came up a lot and time again in the open-ended portion of this was they liked that they saw a diversity of talent. They liked that they saw wrestlers who maybe historically would not have been pushed to a high level, wrestlers like Orange Cassidy or Darby Allin, getting a chance to be presented as stars, being taken seriously by booking. Even if they're not maybe headlining every show, they're treated as, characters on relative equal footing to any other wrestler in the company. And I think that was something that appeals to a lot of people, is that not being focused on like this cookie cutter Vince McMahon impression of what a wrestling star needs to be. And I think that appeals to a lot of people. And in some ways is the strongest sense of AEW's, challenger identity or alternative identity, which is that they are a company that will kind of give anybody a shot and doesn't have this narrow preconceived notion of what a top star needs to be.
And in the characterization too, right? You
Yes.
just mentioned our old pal Vince here. Imagine what he would have done, right? Having Tony Storm and Mariah May last year doing the angle that they were doing. Like just imagine how far off track this would have gone. Whereas well, just Tony Storm in general, right? Who embodies her an entirely different type of characterization, and just like of one that puts her sexuality to the forefront, but not in a sexual way, more like in an empowering way, more like I'm doing it for myself as opposed for anyone else's gaze, essentially, right? These are the types of things that also make AEW different, is because they understand that there's nuance here, there's difference between exploitation and empowerment, and that's really crucial in these types of situations. That's why something like Tony Storm, it works. That's why it works, as opposed to being overly criticized, which would be the case if WWE had decided to go with something like that.
I mean, talk about the negative things that people like about or dislike
But
about AEW.
there's negative things about AEW. What are you talking
There
about? That's not what
are.
I'm not according to social media, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you're one of those blue sky freaks, Warren. I will say, as a fellow blue sky freak, um, the difference in like blue sky is obviously very different than Twitter, for sure, for a bunch of things. I truly think that there is no bigger difference between blue sky and Twitter than how pro AEW Blue Sky is and how
Mm-hmm.
anti WWE Blue Sky is.
Yeah, I was even going
Maybe
to
it's
say
just
that.
me. Maybe I'm not getting that kind of like those like weird trolls aren't seeing my stuff because the algorithm is different. But like I never get anyone saying anything positive about WWE on my Blue
No,
Sky account ever.
no, same, absolutely same.
Um, anyway, so the biggest thing, and this is the second year in a row that this has led the most disliked thing, and it is merchandise. And it doesn't seem like the company is getting any better at this. Warren, are you a wrestling merchandise guy?
Not really,
When
but
you go to a
but
live event, are you walking over to the merch table and getting pulling out the old Canadian wallet to see what you're gonna be buying?
now that, yes. See, if I go to a live event, I'm going to want to leave with something cool, but I'm not necessarily someone who orders a bunch of merchandise. I mean, not that I don't have any, but I'm very selective. I'm not just like, oh, I want more and more and more. That's not necessarily the thing. But when I do go to a live event, yes, I will pull out the Canadian rubber bucks to do that. And look, I've been to multiple AEW events, and I find the merch situation has never improved. I still think I think the available selection whenever I go to shows is the pits. I still can't believe that they ran out of merch at All In last year. To me, it's preposterous that they were not able by the time because I was at All In. By the time that the Swerve Strickland match, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but because I remember I was in line. I had There we go. Hang on, I got the pinpoint. By the time Adam Cole came out to say that he was stepping away because he was injured. They were out of merch. The merch table was bare bones stuff left. It's like,
Just a
it's
single like
preposterous to me.
Max Caster t-shirt.
Yeah, kind of exactly. That's the kind of stuff that was left. Exactly, or like Mike Bailey headbands. Like my Mike
Yeah, just
Bailey.
like what is the last least selling item that they could have?
It's like who wants that? Of course, like all the cool stuff, like the masks that they had made. All of the all in t-shirts, the hats. There were some really good all in Texas hats that I would have really liked, and all of that shit was gone by the time Adam Cole came out to say he was stepping away. It's preposterous, man. I don't understand it.
Yeah, the I own one piece of AEW merchandise and it was only because it was a gift. Actually that's not true because I got two gifts. I have a a Young Bucks action figure set, which is still in its box that I got for
Oh,
Christmas, which I'm not an action figure guy, so but I might as well hold on to those because those might be worth some money one day. And then I also got as a gift a scarf, like one of those like football match scarves that they have in
sure.
Europe. You hold up, and it's from the All In Wembley show, the first one, and it has the date on it, and that's super cool.
Oh,
I have
that's
that
neat.
hanging up in my room. But I am not a wrestling T-shirt guy. I'm not a merchandise guy, and a lot of this because I really don't want to wear a shirt that screams "I watch pro wrestling"
Yeah, yeah.
on it, and that's what I feel like most merchandise is. But so I don't really have strong opinions on it, but clearly people do, and people have a problem both with the merchandise that is being offered, and like you said, kind of the logistical issues with when you go to a live show. I'm not someone that really looks at the merchandise table. I also like never go to WWE shows anymore, so I don't really know like how they do it better. I presume that they do. Um, but that is once again the biggest thing that people seem to find fault with AEW, which if it's going to be something, I imagine that should be it. And to be fair, only about 35% of respondents um, said that the merchandise was something that they disliked, so it's not nearly as universal as like things like that they like. But it is still something to keep in mind, and I think something that they could definitely improve. That's, I think, almost the key point. Something that could I think, easily be improved with just better logistics at live events as a
Sure.
start.
Yeah, I honestly, I really think, I really think that's it because I wasn't alone in that lineup, just waiting, watching stocks dwindle. I was not alone. There was a couple of hundred people still hanging around, just with their wallets open, saying we are willing to give you more of our money. AEW, we already paid for these tickets, and we're ready to give you even more money. But that's the logistical
Just a bunch
quantity
of
issue.
Philip J. Fries holding their money. Shut up and take my money. But there's,
Pretty much.
yeah,
But
they're
yeah,
a
like
t-shirt company, Warren.
or so I've been told. And speaking of those t-shirts, one of the quotes that you pulled actually from regarding that basically talks about the quality of the merch, right? And they say this, it's like the pricing is a little much sometimes, but the main issue is that wearing any of these shirts is kind of cringe outside of a show, which goes to what you're saying. So I think it might behoove AEW at the same time to find that sweet spot between wrestling merchandise and things that you could wear outside of your outside of a wrestling show that you could just wear to a supermarket or whatever without coming across as a massive nerd.
Yeah.
you know
The other big,
and I sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna switch gears.
Okay. Well, that's essentially it. That's and I've heard multiple people say, "Oh, I can buy this T-shirt." I've seen it before because it has happened where people say, "Oh, I can wear this T-shirt and no one will know it's a wrestling T-shirt that I'm wearing," and I think that's something important. But then on the flip side, I also know that look, you go to a wrestling show, you're with wrestling fans, so then there's that communal feeling that you can wear your stuff here, right? I think that's also part of the experience. It's part of the fan experience for people who do really dive deep into merch and whatnot and have their wrestling t-shirts. Like, look, I can wear this here. No one will judge me. And it will it will be a sign of what I like and what I enjoy in pro wrestling, who I want to support in pro wrestling. And, there's that vision as well.
The other kind of big thing that stood out to me was, I think from a critical perspective, a lot of people had problems with the TV production. I think that's
Mhm.
something that's been well documented in terms of like the camera's missing shots. I don't know how that's still a case in some of these. You see some of these things where like as a wrestling fan, you're like, oh, it's very obvious that like they're about to do a dive to the outside, and then yet we still somehow miss that from a television production perspective. And then the other thing is like the announcing teams. I am not like that worried about the announcing teams. It's not something that bothers me enormous amount, but it was something that came up. A lot of people seem um frustrated, I think, with mainly it seems like Excalibur and Tony Schiavone. Some people think that Schiavone has kind of like lost his fastball, and some people find Excalibur annoying. I don't have a problem with Excalibur, and I don't really have a problem with Tony either. My only issue is I do not think Tony should be doing these collisions as the main play-by-play guy. That just at this
Sure.
stage of his career with the pacing of the action, he's not the guy that should be doing that. They need to have like an Ian Riccaboni or Excalibur or somebody that can do that end of it so he can kind of play off of them as a side commentator as opposed to the lead guy.
Is it 1996 again? We're bitching about Tony Schiavone on commentary. Holy smokes, what a flashback I'm going for here. Jeez. I feel like I've been this down this road before, but yeah, I'm with you though. Like commentary is not that big of an issue for me as far as AEW goes. Like if like for me, it doesn't create any impediments to my enjoyment of the show. Now, I'd probably have a different take if I felt like someone was really, really dragging everything down. But I don't know. It I think the tables are fine. Is there a bit of Excalibur fatigue? I feel that in the fan base. I feel it that there's that level of that there's a level of Excalibur fatigue. But other than that, it's like no, I don't have that much of an issue with it. But it, like you said, it does pop up quite a bit.
Yeah, a lot of praise for Ian Riccaboni. He's someone that people are like, I wish Ian Riccaboni was on the show more. I wish Ian Riccaboni did Collision all the time. I think less Excalibur, more Ian Riccaboni. Um,
It's almost as if he's very good at what he does.
yeah, it is almost like that. I think that their commentary is fine. I like, Bryan Danielson. I like Nigel McGuinness. Excalibur doesn't bother me at all. Like a lot of people are saying Excalibur is like annoying, but I don't really get what Excalibur is doing that annoys people, but
Mm,
I don't know. I have generally pretty
no
high
idea.
standards, I think, or low standards for like sports commentators. Like most of them, especially play-by-play guys, don't bother me. Only a handful of people do. Um,
Like Booker T, okay? Like that's the guy that comes up a lot, right? The rare clips that I see of NXT where he's on commentary, like outside of all the jokes and all the memes and all of the worst wrestler of the year from the Observer newsletter stuff, he, for me personally, I could not watch that show with that man on commentary. Like it's an immediate mute. I'd put on some music and watch NXT with everything on mute. That is a complete impediment to the show. But I don't
yeah.
have that in NXT in AEW. There's no
The
one to that degree.
the only person that's like that in AEW is Jim Ross, but he does like one match a month, if that.
Once every quarter it feels. But yeah,
Well,
okay,
and Jim
sure.
Ross does like if Jim Ross wants to do whatever, like that's different than
Yeah.
Booker T, obviously. But like when JR is on the call, I'm like, oh man, what's like everything is so awkward. I mean, they've you know, I know part of it is because he's had, health problems, and I have a ton of sympathy for that, but they have rightfully put him out to pasture.
Sure.
Um, like, I don't really go back and watch a lot of like Dynamites or pay-per-view matches from like the early stages, but it does kind of be like, man, I feel like I'm gonna go back and listen to those. I'm like, oh my God, Jim Ross is on commentary. This is gonna make things a lot worse.
I
Um,
agree.
anyway, next category is, do AEW fans trust Tony Khan? Overwhelming, yes, it was at 81%. That's up from 68% the year before. So I think that is reflective in like the quality of the product has increased. So a lot of people feel confident about Tony Khan. So we got 81% people said yes. Only 8% of people said no, and then the remaining 10% was people who had no opinion. Um, I would say if this is more or less a progress report or for Tony Khan, he passed. And I think this is reflective on a lot of things we've already said about the improvements from last year.
Yeah, the things I think a lot of the stuff that came up in the responses were, they appreciate his fan first mentality.
Hmm.
They appreciate the fact that they appreciate the pay per view quality that he puts on. That you always get a lot of bang for your buck. The accessible pricing of tickets comes up as well. And his overall, like, they his message board credentials seem to also feed into that trust. The fact that he knows about wrestling, that he is a massive wrestling nerd, creates that feeling of trust as well.
Yeah, I think with Tony, it really comes down to that fans genuinely really believe that he is a big wrestling fan and he wants to produce a product that he would enjoy as a fan.
Yes.
And I think fans feel that connection with Tony, despite obviously the fact that he's a billionaire that had, enough money and resources to start his own wrestling promotion, which is something that fans can never relate to. He generally is just like, you know what, want to watch wrestling that I enjoy, and I'm going to produce a product that does that. And fans, even fans that are, critical of him, understand that and feel that sense with him. And it's a contrast to WWE and this company, and whether it's Vince McMahon or now Paul Levesque, where it just seems like there's kind of like a disdain for the fans, that they're booking for what they want to see, not necessarily what the fans want to see. And that Tony does feel very different, where he is, and he wasn't someone that was like born into this role or anything like that. He is somebody that, was born into having a lot of money, but it was like, you know what I want to do with my life? I want to run a professional wrestling promotion. And I want it to be like a vanity project, but like in a good way. Like this is
Right.
like, I don't know if I would want a wrestling promotion, but it's something that I would consider doing if I had his resources, right? Like I would, what's something I really want to do? Like I want to run a professional wrestling promotion and I want it to reflect everything that I like about pro wrestling. And I feel like fans get that with Tony when they don't see that in other promotions, especially
Well,
WWE.
here's a quote from one of the responses. I think that really encapsulates the Tony Khan persona, right?
Mhm.
This is the quote. He loves wrestling and respects his talent. He's a fan like me, so I know he's always looking at it from that perspective and not driven by greed. There you go. Like, you couldn't have a more different like persona established there between Tony Khan and Triple H.
Yeah, not
Paul
driven by
Levesque.
greed is a great point, because for all of Tony's faults, like in the criticisms of Tony are right, like, maybe he doesn't handle every talent situation the right way. He, is maybe like stretching himself too thin, and there's some booking lapses because he's got all these other roles out, within AEW and outside of AEW that are taking too much of his time. Um, and all this kind of stuff. The one thing you have to, give him credit for, he is not focused on like greed and in money basically,
Right.
which comes from the privilege of his position, but also is a huge contrast to especially WWE now.
I and I look, if anyone from AEW is listening right now, this is what your PR spin should be regarding the company and Tony Khan. Like, you couldn't have a more clear definition of a clear line of differentiation here, because everything that most wrestling fans criticize Paul Levesque for is embodied in Tony Khan.
It is
I
a
it's
genuinely fan first company.
Yes.
It is not
Yes.
perfect, but when you watch the show or you go to an event, you're like, this is a show, this is a promotion that like values me as a customer and as a viewer.
Correct.
Tony comes out every single show that I've been to, at least. He comes
Mhm.
out, he personally thanks everyone for coming. He's a little awkward, but it's part of the charm. And you get the sense that Tony genuinely, he definitely says the same thing in every city and whatever, but you do get the sense that genuinely this guy is really excited that he's producing this wrestling show and that fans are, enjoying it.
Yes, absolutely. Should we talk about things that people don't like as much about Tony?
Sure. I mean,
Because
yeah, no,
like
go ahead.
the because from what I gathered in the commentary and the not the commentary, excuse me, the answers and whatnot, man, people want more women's wrestling on AEW. Like
Yes. It's the
that's
number one answer
really
for things that people want to change.
it's crazy. Like that is really like the number of responses
Yeah. And that's
that
that's the case every year, by the way, and every time I've done the survey, that's the number one thing people hear about.
and it's the single most consistent theme, and it's across like not just do you trust Tony Khan or not, like throughout your other questions, right? What do you dislike? What would you change? Why did you stop watching? There's always there's a massive swell of things that have to do with the lack of women's wrestling. The quotes here: women will not be represented properly unless they have representation in front and behind the camera. That's one comment here. Here's another one. You can do the functional math to see that the entire division receives around 10% of the total screen time a month. People are making the math, doing math here to figure it out. I'm just tired of a 7-year-old company that insists it takes women's wrestling seriously, but hasn't had a women's match main event, a pay-per-view. It's all arguments we've heard before. It's all criticisms we've heard before. But holy smokes, man, it's crazy. Like getting my hands into the data, it's crazy how this really is a sticking point for a lot of fans of AEW, and it is always the one thing that they will push and prod and talk about. Well, Tony, we like you, but you don't do anything with your women. They will criticize Tony about the women much more than the pay-per-views are too long, like the length of pay-per-views.
Yes, that. And here's the thing about that is I think, like you said, you're seeing this data, right? And I've seen it all 3 years with this survey response. And I think sometimes it's like easy to kind of like hand wave these people, like, oh, the stopwatch slappers on social media that are mad the women's segment only got 7 minutes or whatever. I think sometimes we can people fall into the trap of dismissing this group as like a very vocal minority of fans. But if there's any one of the main takeaways from the survey would be that that is something that it's not like doesn't appear to be that much of a niche opinion, at least among the
No,
hardcore fan sample size. That,
because you've
yeah,
got, like you said at the start of the show, you have practically 1,800 responses here. This is a solid sample. When I used to work for a data company back in the early 2000s, and we were doing phone surveys and stuff like that, the sample size of 1,000 was considered the baseline for having like a good overview. You practically have double of that, and I mean it's a continuous sticking point. It's not, it doesn't, not from what I'm looking at here, it's not a niche issue. It's not something that's just like, oh, it's a few vocal fans, like you were saying. It really does feel problematic and something that erodes the goodwill that people have and trust that they have in AEW every time they quote unquote do the women dirty.
yeah. We did ask fans if they enjoyed WWE, and again, this is a sample size, and only 14% of fans said yes. 44% of fans said that they don't watch WWE, and 41% said they don't watch WWE. I actually got several people in my life asking me, can I change this poll? Because there were people that wanted to say that they both don't watch WWE and that they don't dis and they don't like WWE. They wanted that to be
Right.
an option. So, but only 14% of people said that they enjoy WWE. Um,
Well,
so
hang on a second here, Tony. Hey,
Tony,
Tony.
yeah.
Hang on a second here, Jesse. Are you? But I've been told multiple times that if AEW is going to succeed, it has to do things more like WWE. Now,
Yep. If
what
they
you're
want to be
telling me,
mainstream, Warren, if they want to
yeah,
be
if they want to be
mainstream,
mainstream, they got to do things more like WWE. But what you're telling me is that only 14% of the audience enjoys WWE. That's what you're telling me?
yeah, and Dave Meltzer did me a solid. He tweeted out this link when I asked him for it, which Dave is the best because I just emailed Dave. Oh, and by the way, this was like one day after I released a podcast where I kind of bury his entire site, with Trevor Dame. But I emailed Dave and I said like, hey Dave, I'm doing this survey, AEW fan survey. I was hoping, could you possibly post this on social media because with your following it would really help solicit responses. Dave doesn't, he doesn't send me an email acknowledging that he got it. He doesn't say anything to me. But then, like 5 minutes after I send the email, I see on his Twitter that he sent it out. I was like, Dave, it's just the best. Um, but
That's
Dave
awesome.
Meltzer tweeted this out, and we know how, Dave Meltzer's Twitter reply people, they love WWE. So the
Hmm.
fact that, they saw this but still, we only have 14% of responses of people saying they like WWE. Now, I think if you went to an AEW live event and did a straw poll of people and said, "Hey, do you guys like WWE?" we would get more than 14%. I think that this is impartially a reflection of this being a hardcore kind of AEW leaning fan base. But at the same time, I do think it's pretty relevant that so the number is even among this fan group is still so low.
I agree, and I agree with the assumption that if you went live face to face, we'd probably get another number. But nonetheless, if we consider that 65% of the people who answered are day one viewers, right?
Yes.
That's that's and within that, like 14% are like, well, no, I don't care much about WWE. That's a significant
That's
amount
a
of
good
your
point.
people saying this is what we really like AEW, and we will continue to support you because we massively either do not watch or do not like WWE.
Yeah.
So I think that's another way to present the data. And my dog has her favorite squeaker toy. I don't know if it's coming in through the microphone,
Oh, I
but she
wish it was.
decided,
I haven't heard it yet.
okay, that's fine. Oh, she just ran away now with it because I was talking about her. Because of course, she ran up right next to me and started squeaking with it. So I was like, of course, as I'm making a very salient point, you have
Yeah,
to
a
do
lot of
that. But
pet
she ran away.
run-ins on this show.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
I'm gonna lie next and say like, "Oh, my pet elephant. Oh, it's coming into the room. Oh, you guys can't hear it. Oh, he's super loud. He's blowing his trumpet. Can you hear that, Warren?"
No, no, interesting. What kind of elephant do you have?
It's an Indian elephant or an Asian elephant. It's not
Interesting,
quite as big
interesting.
as an African elephant, but it's
Yeah, it
yeah,
has to fit. It has to fit into your apartment with your roommate, right? So
yeah,
it
of
can't. Yeah,
course,
exactly.
as one is likely to have. Um, but yeah, and so kind of in related to that, we asked, what other promotions do AW fans watch besides WWE? Obviously, we know 14% of WWE respondents, but kind of similar, like New Japan has the most. It has, I think like 45% of fans said that they watch New Japan Pro Wrestling on a regular basis. That was followed by Ring of Honor, CMLL, Stardom, then WWE, TNA, Pro Wrestling Noah, and AAA kind of at a much lower percentage. Um, Again, like TNA, the most interesting thing about this to me is, again, this is skewing towards hardcore fans. And obviously, like, I think New Japan would love it if 45% of all AEW fans, especially given how Western skewing, the survey results are, if 45% of that fan base was watching AEW, New Japan, but that's, I don't think the case.
Sure,
Um, but kind of interesting is just like how far behind TNA is in this, with
sure.
under 10% of AEW fans in the survey. Again, hardcore wrestling fans that like watching wrestling, like none of them have any time for TNA, which again is, TNA gets talked about, and it's always been the case. like it's this huge company that is, has is the third biggest company or whatever, and there's just no evidence to really suggest that.
I'm this is one of the data points that surprised me the most because I was not expecting that high of a response in regards to New Japan, people doing crossover, still watching New Japan. Now, like you said, I know it's a hardcore audience, but nonetheless, I really felt the divide for a few years for the past few years has been much wider than this. I like we're closer to 50% than I thought. And I'm a little surprised at that, Jesse, quite honestly.
But I'll
The
say like
same goes for Ring of Honor. Sorry, go ahead.
last year's survey, which only had about half as many respondents. I think we had 800 respondents in last year's survey as opposed to the 1,700 we have this year, and that New Japan number was like 65 or almost 70%.
Oh shit. Okay. So
So I think that
okay.
was even, and I think that was because we were cutting it down to even more of a hardcore Voices of Wrestling kind of circle, as opposed to this year's
Interesting.
survey, which spread further out, which I think
Okay,
flattened
so
out that number.
that's really interesting. So it means so now that we've doubled the numbers, so it's actually not as impressive as I thought. it
Yeah.
it's the gap is even wider. It doesn't okay, interesting. But like nonetheless, we do see that that AEW fans are a lot more are wrestling literate. Let's put it that way, right? They have interests elsewhere. What was the number for CMLL last year? Do you have that handy too, or
I don't. It definitely went
okay?
up.
I would
I
assuming
think.
it'd go up, and Stardom probably went up as well.
Yeah, CMLL and Stardom went up. What's interesting is WWE went down. So WWE is 27.5% this year. It is just under 20% for WWE.
Interesting.
So again, kind of
Oh, this
interesting.
is really fast. This is legitimately fascinating. A fascinating data point that the you've practically doubled the number of respondents, and even less people than last year say, "Yeah, I watch New Japan along with AEW." That's absolutely
Yeah, well,
fascinating to
I think
me.
with New Japan it makes sense because I think we got a little bit more. I think this year's survey from a voting pool is a little bit less hardcore fan base than last year's
Sure.
smaller poll, which makes WWE's slide even more interesting because you would think that it would go up with these WWE fans with the survey, reaching more people and kind of a wider diversity of people. It'd be more likely to catch, the worldwide leader in pro wrestling in WWE. But the fact that that declined, I think mirrors a decline in WWE's overall popularity across the board, which is something that we're seeing right now in 2026 from a business perspective and from a
Hmm.
fan interest perspective. Um, but that's something that I find kind of fascinating, too.
I guess like if I were to dig deeper into this and really do some research, I think my thesis would then be that AEW fans will mostly watch AEW only, or at the very least will not turn necessarily to the usual fallback, which is New Japan. But yeah, I kind of feel it kind of feels like the that AEW fans feel like they're well served by their company and don't feel necessarily that they have to go elsewhere, at least in high numbers. Very
So,
interesting.
right. So, we'll talk about people's favorite wrestlers now. So every year we do this. I ask people to, there's a big, checklist on the survey where we ask people what their favorite, who are their favorite wrestlers in AEW and who are their least favorite wrestlers in AEW. And I ask people, no more than 10 each way. Some people don't follow the rules. It's okay. Most people do, so
Hmm.
that's improved. And so we come up, we come up with this list of like, who are the 10 most popular wrestlers in AEW and who are the 10 least popular wrestlers in AEW. And I'll read it out right now in case people haven't seen it, but this is of course on, the survey story. It's on voiceofwrestling.com. But our top 10 favorite wrestlers, according to the group, are Kenny Omega at number one, and he's followed by, in order, Will Ospreay, Adam Page, Tony Storm, Konosuke Takeshita, Kyle Fletcher, John Moxley, Swerve Strickland, Willow Nightingale, and MJF. Warren, is there anything in that list that stands out to you or surprised you? To me, it feels kind of chalk, but I'm curious what you think about it.
It looks here's Mercedes Moné not cracking the top 10 is a little odd to me.
And she never does well on this.
And it's very strange to me. But other than that, it's kind of the vibe I get in AEW, like watching fan interactions and whatnot, and who gets big reactions online and so on and so forth. This all makes sense to me. Kenny Omega still being number one despite being inactive for a good part of 2025 is wild, but also shows just how closely identified he is to this brand, like how crucial he is to like the hardcore AEW fans' appreciation of the company. We were talking about it during a certain segment of the year where Kenny was there but didn't feel like Joe Lanza put it, and I've been using that expression since, feels like he hasn't been part of the fabric of AEW despite him being there. And now since the start of the year of 2026, with being involved in the world title picture and scrambling for a spot, and his feud with Swerve, it feels now that he's back in the mix, that he feels like he's part of the promotion again, outside, as opposed to his post surgery where he's kind of like, well, yeah, I'm kind of here and I'm doing a few things. Oh, I'm doing a cage match with Kota Ibushi, and we're all hoping he doesn't get injured, type of thing. That to me that's what's most telling to me in that regard. A guy who is who's not at the peak of his powers anymore, but still captivates AEW fans to be added into these to be added as number one on this list.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I think that there's a lot of recency bias in terms of like Kenny is obviously getting a lot of TV time right now and right when people are filling out the survey. So I think that's part of it. But Kenny's always done well. Kenny was second last year behind Hangman Page. So we had the same kind of three names at the top. It was last year's was Hangman, Kenny, Will Ospreay. This year it's Kenny, Will Ospreay, and Hangman. And in fact, most of the names were repeats from last year. Uh, so last year's top 10, the only people that weren't on it this year that were on last year's were um, Bryan Danielson, who's retired, Orange Cassidy, and Eddie Kingston. And this year they were replaced by Kyle Fletcher, Moxley, and MJF. Moxley and MJF, of course, are longtime people within the company that were doing, maybe their career worst work when the survey was taken last year, and have since subsequently performed very strongly, I think, by most people's standards. So that's why it's not surprising to see them jump up into the top 10. And then Kyle Fletcher is obviously a guy whose star has been on the rise since last year. So none of that is super surprising to me. To answer any question you might have, Mercedes Moné did finish 14th on this list.
Right.
She finished.
Yeah, I have the top 15 in front of me here. And it's interesting because she finished at 14, but Tekla even finished higher than her at 12.
In between Tekla and Andrade El Idolo.
Yeah.
Which, if you were to ask me last year, like those two names in particular finishing like in the top 15 is kind of interesting, I think.
I agree.
Um,
I agree.
but part of it's recency, like, right? I think, Tekla's up a lot.
Especially when it comes to Tekla. I agree. Recency bias probably.
Yeah. I do.
Playing a
So I
role.
do have to come clean that, for some reason, and I really have absolutely no idea why this was done, and my conclusion is that it itself was done by a bot. But somebody like the responses, I've been monitoring the responses, ever since I put the survey out, and the survey's open for a week. And on the final day, near the final ending of the survey, something happened where somebody submitted 30,000 ballots. right? So to give you the impression, we have 1,700 real ballots. And so somebody submitted 30,000 different surveys. It's very clearly done using some sort of bot mechanism because it was all these fake emails and it skewered all of like the Google Forms statistics, right? So all of a sudden, whatever that the 30,000 ballots, because they all said the exact same thing, that skewed everything. So for instance, uh, Ace Austin got the most votes for according to the Google Forms uh, survey. He got 30,000 votes. He got 94.7% of all ballots submitted Ace Austin because of the skewering. And Kenny Omega technically only got 3.2% of all ballots. Of course, I
Ace
went in.
Austin, huh?
Yeah, I went in and deleted these. Now, people are like, "Oh,
We'd have
we
to
must
just
like."
very quickly have we reached out to Gia Miller? Has she developed some kind of hacking skills over
Well,
the past?
Sarah from Trish and Sarah is the person I think of when I think of Ace Austin fans. So I think she could have done it. But the reason I know that Ace Austin fan actually is not the person who did this, because on the next checklist where you say who your least favorite wrestler is, they also only said Ace Austin. So Ace Austin is far and away, according to the Google Form sheet, the most least favorite wrestler. But the real reason they put Ace Austin down was because Ace Austin is alphabetically the first person on the AEW roster, which made them
Sure.
alphabetically the first person that option that was listed in both of these. Which is also how this person, whoever did this, and which makes me think it's probably not a person, but more of a bot, did everything, right? They checked the box when it said, "Do you trust Tony Khan?" They said yes. So Tony Khan has 99% approval in the Google form sheet because the 30,000 bot accounts said yes. But that was just because yes was the first option presented to them. So clearly, I don't know what they were trying to do. Like, it would have been funnier if it was like a more unique troll. I think this seems like just for whatever reason a bot got a hold of the link and then filled this fake survey out. And Google Forms is actually a mess to delete all this info. So I was able to delete all the info from the Google Sheet, which is where we're gleaning all of our actual statistics from. But actually,
Mhm.
the Google Forms survey itself still says Ace Austin is both our most liked and most disliked wrestler in AEW. So um, was kind of annoying, caused me some extra frustration, but is also kind of funny too. Um,
It's very funny, actually.
yeah. I always find it really funny when because I try to list almost everyone on the AEW roster. I did not list people who I felt like hadn't been on television in a really long time or whose contract status was kind of unknown, which we'll get to when I talk about the least favorite wrestler in a second. But it is always funny to me, like because people have the option to, check up to 10, so there's definitely some vanity picking going in. But I do find like some of these answers pretty funny. Like when people just kind of pick like a random wrestler and they get like a lot of votes, or at least
Mhm.
maybe not a lot comparatively, but 115 people, thought that, El Clone is one of their 10 favorite wrestlers in AEW, right? El
Okay,
Clone, who's had like
sure.
what, three matches?
Yeah, a
Um,
handful anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and Julia Hart. 101 people filled it out and said Julia Hart was one of their favorites. So it is funny. Even people that are more like obscure, Mansoor got 61% of the votes. Mason Madden got, or not 61, 61 total votes. Mason Madden got 50 total votes. Um,
Did they talk about it on one of their live streams? Maybe. Do you think do you think that's what they did?
I don't know. I don't know. But I always find that kind of interesting. Just like there's a fan, somebody is a fan, has a fan out there, no matter how small of a wrestler they are, no matter how infrequently they're used, no matter how incompetent they may be perceived, they have
Hmm.
a fan out there that absolutely loves them.
Absolutely.
Turbo Floyd getting a few more votes than Truth Magnum is kind of interesting because I actually can't tell them apart at all. Like I don't know actually know which one's which.
Turbo is the lankier one, right?
Okay.
Turbo
But
Floyd is the lankier one. Truth Magnum is the stockier one.
yeah.
And you see, I'm more of a Truth Magnum guy.
Yeah. So do you have a definitive opinion though? One of them is making the cut, one of them's not. Because I can see them both. If you're gonna vote for one, you probably should vote for both.
Well, you'd vote for both, right? I'd vote for the tag team, right? But gun to my head, it's like one of these guys has to go. Well,
Yeah. Just missing
sayonara,
on the top
Turbo or
10. I'll
Floyd.
just I'll run through the 10 through 20 really fast. It goes Brody King, Bandito, Thekla, Mercedes Moné, Andrade El Idolo, Kazuchika Okada, Eddie Kingston, Darby Allin, Mike Bailey, Chris Statlander, Orange Cassidy, and Jamie Hayter. So again, nothing really surprising. I think it's valuable that like the most pushed people in the promotion for the most part are occupying these slots. Um, Now, the least favorite wrestler is a very important editor's note I have for this least favorite wrestler. As I said earlier, I didn't want to include anyone that like hadn't been on TV in a while or whose contract status was uncertain. And that was really for one very specific reason. And that specific reason, Warren, was because I did not want to put Chris Jericho on this list because Chris Jericho I knew would win the least favorite wrestler category because he dominates it every single year. And at the time that the survey went out, and by the time the survey ended, Chris Jericho hadn't been on AEW television almost a year. His contract status was relatively unknown. Nobody knew anything about it. So of course, what happens 2 days before I write everything, get ready to publish the survey? Chris Jericho returns to AEW television.
There
So
you go.
there's no Chris Jericho on this list. I think he would have easily won least favorite wrestler if he had been on this list. Other people like Britt Baker, who also is kind of in a similar I think situation from a has been on TV in a while, not really sure what her contract is, not really sure what's going on there. She fin Jericho and Britt Baker finished 1-2 last year. Didn't include them this year, but that is why Chris Jericho does not top this list. Now,
Right.
Sammy Guevara by proxy, I think, kind of does. So our least favorite wrestlers are in order 1 through 10. Number one, least favorite wrestler, Sammy Guevara. He's followed by Adam Copeland, Hook, Billy Gunn, Anthony Ogogo, Bobby Lashley, Scorpio Sky, Gabe Kidd, MVP, and Dustin Rhodes. Any takeaways you have from that list of least favorite wrestlers?
I think it's crazy that Sammy Guevara is at the top of the list when he is barely on AEW television.
He's a
Like,
proxy for Jericho. That's how I have to think. People like I can't. I want Jericho's my least favorite, but I'll vote for Sammy because he's definitely on the list. And you also have to say like people are looking at this huge list and they feel like some of them they have to pick 10, so they're kind of going through the list. But I agree with you that I would definitely not include Sammy on this list.
I mean, he has had a couple of appearances, right? But I guess the proxy thing is that, or it's just people continue to have just a bad taste in their mouth when they think about Sammy. Let me when he showed up, in Ring of Honor and started, and then with doing stuff with the Rush's group. Sorry, the name is escaping me right now. And
Faccione
won
and
the
Golden
title.
Able.
That's it. That's it. Gee, why did I forget that? But he's been um like people had really visceral reactions about him. Like, okay, it's fine. Like he's going to be a mid-card act in the sub brand of AEW. So why do well, I like to say nobody watches, but 35% of the hardcore seem to do, or 38 seem to watch Ring of Honor. But it's like, why are people so bothered about that? So that's my first one. And second of all, Anthony Ogogo? Like, what is to dislike about Anthony Ogogo when he does nothing?
He's the
Like,
governor.
nothing. He does nothing. You couldn't point to someone more inoffensive to me and my tastes in general than Anthony Ogogo. It's not as if
He
he's pushed. He's not even as if
he
he's featured. He's on
he
nothing.
he ruined Cody Rhodes' AEW career.
Oh, is that what he did?
I don't know. I mean,
Is
I
it
think
his fault?
no, it's definitely not Anthony Ogogo's fault. I think in general, the things that stand out among the least like list is people don't like people who are old, which is why Billy Gunn is in fourth. But also you have people like Adam Copeland, Bobby Lashley, MVP, Dustin Rhodes, these guys who, are associated with WWE. So people don't like that. Uh, and then these other people are kind of like I would call them like Tony Khan's like pet projects, or these people he can't quit, like Sammy or Hook or Scorpio Sky. Now, the good news from an AEW perspective is that on this list, the only people that are really like regularly featured right now on television are Adam Copeland and Gabe Kidd.
Mm-hmm.
And even though both Adam Copeland and Gabe Kidd appear on this list of least favorite wrestlers, I think that both of them in general have uh, an understandable value and reason for being in the company at this point.
Yes.
Like, even if, Adam Copeland finished second in least favorite wrestlers, we understand why he's in AEW. Um,
Mhm.
and if you were, I'll tell you, he was not the least favorite wrestler for the fans that went to Revolution because that guy got a gigantic pop when he returned.
Uh,
Uh, so he's,
Everyone likes the theme song.
yeah. I'm kind of surprised Gabe Kidd is up to eighth because he has not been in AEW very long. And this is kind of an attrition thing where most of these guys have been in the company for a really long time. Or fans have been really familiar with them for a long time, like a Bobby Lashley or MVP. Like Gabe Kidd, he's climbing up. He's climbing up this ranking quickly. Now I don't know if that's going to change over time, but he is somebody that clearly fans, at least from the survey group, are not excited about seeing.
Yeah. I think his presentation needs some tweaking. I think he comes across that he's trying a little too hard, and I think it can be a little off-putting to the North American viewing audience. Because it's interesting because I find he had hit a I find like he had hit a really good balance in New Japan, um like late 2024 leading into to 2025. I found that he had hit a really good balance, but look, anyway, we're not going to dissect Gabe Kidd here. But like overall, I think it's important nonetheless to note here that um the percentage of the percentage of respondents who picked, let's say, Copeland and Gabe for their least favorites, overall represent less than a quarter of the respondents, right? Like
Yes, this
Adam
is not
Copeland.
nearly as dominant as the favorite wrestlers are.
No, where Kenny Omega is like at practically at 60%. Adam Copeland at number two, well, he's like 21.9% of
Yeah.
respondents.
So only
Gabe
one out of
Kidd's
every
at
five fans
right.
in
And
this group is saying they dislike Adam Copeland. I also think with Gabe Kidd, there might be some, New Japan fans that are annoyed by his exit from that company to go to AEW and kind of the way that whole thing.
and do you think they're annoyed to the point where they're like, I'm gonna answer Jesse's survey and I'm gonna bury this guy?
Well, they
You think
might
they,
be AEW fans too. I could totally see,
uh,
being someone that watches both promotions and being like, Gabe Kidd did this angle last year with Kenny Omega where he's like, I'm the heart and soul of New Japan, and you're a traitor for going to AEW, and then like he spent like the rest of 2025 showing up on AEW and being a pseudo Death Rider, and now he's like fully in the company and has left New Japan. Like, I can
yeah.
totally understand if you were like a primary New Japan fan being like, fuck this guy.
I agree. No,
Um,
I'm absolutely. I mean, that could be part of it. I mean, sure. I don't know. Like me as a guy who watches both AEW and New Japan, it doesn't bother me. You know what I mean? Like the
It doesn't
Gabe
bother
Kidd
me, but
leaving,
I also can kind of
but
see it like it's a very inconsistent, even if it doesn't bother you personally because you're like rooting for one team over another or whatever. It is like inconsistent character work. It's confusing. It's like, I think part
yeah,
of Gabe Kidd's original appeal was he felt like real and he wasn't like playing a pro wrestler, and now he's just like kind of feels like he just sold out. So he's not as appealing
fair
anymore.
enough. Yeah, I guess. But it's nonetheless very interesting to see that the percentage of the least favorites are somewhat are massively smaller. Like even Sammy was at the top, massively smaller than the wrestlers
Yeah,
who
a
are
lot of
well
people didn't fill
liked.
the section out, or maybe they put like one person on there, which I also find very funny when just there's like one answer where like there was one guy that just put down like he had one least favorite wrestler and it was Anthony Nese. Um, and that always that's the kind of stuff that I get when I do this survey that makes me laugh every time because it's just like this person's like, who do I dislike? And they're scrolling through, who I like? Fuck Tony Nese, and that's the only person they put down.
Who was actually like really good, and
Yeah, I
why
know. That's why it's like how there, but like we said, I guess if we said there's a fan out there for every fan, there's a hater out there
there's a
as
hater
well.
for everyone too. That I agree.
There's someone that just hates Tonys. We asked people this was a fully open-ended question. We asked what fans would change about the promotion, and we got all sorts of answers. Number one by far being the biggest, I think, being the women's wrestling, which we talked about. A lot of discussion about championships and like there being too many titles and the titles not meaning enough. So that was another common one. Another big one I think was, especially coming from international fans, some frustration from pay-per-view start times, how long the pay-per-views are going, pay-per-views on Sunday versus Saturday, because on Saturday, a hardcore fan in Europe, can stay up to the, all night and watch, an AEW event. But when those events are on Sunday, you're talking about like, well, I can't stay up till like, 7 a.m. UK time to watch
Yeah.
a pay-per-view because I have to go to work Monday morning. And then some of the
I think
fans,
that was
especially,
even I think that was even one of the criticisms. I think I had a quote here. Yeah, see, he said his views on show length. This is a quote from one of the respondents. His
yeah.
views on show length reek of someone who has never had to worry about work the next day, or paying for a babysitter, or getting multiple trains home late at night. That's
That's a great, I mean, I don't know how
it's a
accurate it
great
really
one.
is
It's a
to
great
Tony's
one.
view, but it's a great point.
It is a good point.
What have my private jet that can just fly me to the next place? I don't care about the show being too long.
People
Um,
have kids,
yeah,
It's like, what?
yeah, and kind of interesting. I thought was like all these like questions that people had because the survey has people from all over the world, the streaming deals, in different countries, access to AEW product is not as seamless as it is in the US or Canada or the UK. It can be quite difficult. So I thought that was interesting. And then some people just have really weird criticisms that I find really funny. Like um, there were multiple people that just responded in these exact words, make it gayer. And I really don't know if those are troll response or very serious responses, and I could go either way. I'm leaning, I guess, towards more serious.
I I
Um,
would I would I would have to say that this is a legitimate request from an AEW fan. I It makes perfect sense to me.
yes. Which is hilarious. Um, Another one of my favorite responses was this person who suggested that they would, quote, bring in experienced names like Bully Ray, Jonathan Coachman, Vince Russo, Jim Cornette, Eric Bischoff, Scott D'Amore to help Tony Khan.
That has to be a gag. I will I will not accept someone saying that seriously.
Imagine all those people working in a room together. I know it basically happened in TNA, but
Ugh.
what does Jonathan Coachman bring to the table from a creative perspective?
I don't know if people realize that he was just a mouthpiece.
Yeah, I pointed this out on the Discord when I saw this response because it's so funny. Like, it shows how like effective like the anti AEW like Twitter grift can be in terms of like because Coachman has been a critic of AEW, people now see him as like somebody that knows what they're talking about because this
Yeah.
person is blinded by AEW hatred. So like yeah, if Coach said it, that's right because he was in WWE and he obviously knows what he's talking about because he's shitting on this product that I don't like. Like as irredeemably stupid as like the Vince Russo fanboys are, like at least Vince Russo was at some point in time a creative person working for major pro wrestling companies that was
Hmm.
in charge of some periods that maybe these fans enjoyed. Like at least that exists. Same with Bischoff or like a Cornette type. Like, but like Jonathan Coachman is like does he's like just like essentially like someone that's not even like really a fan of pro wrestling. He just like had a job for a few years.
Yeah, he was a glorified mic stand. That's what he was. It's really funny. Do you think Dave LaGreca sometimes gets upset that he's never considered for these creative spots when fans go off like this? Do you think he gets, he sees Jonathan Coachman and he goes, "What about me?" Type of
Do you
thing.
think LaGreca's angling for a job? Because most of these guys are angling for jobs. They would love to work with Tony Khan. I don't know if I get the impression that LaGreca like wants to be a creative person in wrestling.
Maybe not a creative
I never
person,
listened to
but
Busted Open, by the way, so I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say I know what he sounds like because I don't.
but maybe not as a creative. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm just, maybe Jonathan Coachman doesn't want to be a creative either. It's just funny that he's getting thrown into these things. But LaGreca did show up on NXT that one time with Bubba Ray, right? So I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be close to employment, a steady paycheck from WWE.
We I did a follow-up kind of to this survey, which is something that I want to do. And we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, the 5.9% of fans who responded to this podcast that said, or 5.3% that said they started watching AEW in the past year. And I reached out to these fans because I requested for their email addresses as part of the survey. And I emailed them supplemental, separate questions steered around the fact that they are new AEW fans. These are not hardcore, huge, lifelong WWE or lifelong, AEW fans. These are people who have stumbled across the product in the past year and have started watching it. And to me, these are the most interesting people that the survey can turn up. These are honest to God new fans that AEW has made. And I wanted to know what they think about the product because, as I said earlier, so much of wrestling discussion is about like pundits pontificating about what AEW needs to do to attract fans and what those fans think about the product. When ultimately people like you and I, Warren, we don't really know what these people think about the product. I have
Right.
absolutely no idea what somebody who never watched pro wrestling before thinks about when they see AEW
Right.
because I'm a lifelong wrestling fan, so I know what a fan would think, but I think most people don't understand this perspective at all. So I thought this was very, very interesting, which is why I have created this supplemental piece, which is online now. If people want to read it, it should be connected. It's going to be linked um, to the survey results story, and it's going to be on its own separate article on voiceofwrestling.com. So people should click on it if they want to know more, because I think this is super fascinating. I know I shared it with you already, Warren. Um, I'm just going to try to run through it like as fast as possible, and then we can talk about what they said, just in the interest of time.
Sure.
My first question was basically, how did you first discover AEW, right? How is AEW getting on the radar screen for these fans? And I also have to thank all these people that actually answered my stupid questions because we wouldn't have this information if they didn't do it. And I'm really impressed. A lot of people, put thought into to these responses, so I appreciate all of them. Um, but how did people discover AEW, right? Almost all of it is through like social media. One person said that they discovered it when they were watching Dark Side of the Ring, which is actually what brought them back. They had been a lapsed wrestling fan. They saw Dark Side of the Ring, found out about AEW, saw it was streaming on Max, and started watching it.
Hmm.
Other people talking about they saw it through, they saw a GIF on Tumblr of All Out Texas, and they saw, the Moxley versus um, Hangman match, and like, whoa, that's so cool. Started watching just like that. Some people, a friend told them about it, but a lot of this is through social media and seeing something on social media, um, which I
Yeah.
think is,
If I could,
yeah, no, go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry. No, if I can jump in just to add on to that, that's it. That's what I found interesting here is that zero respondents talked about traditional advertising or mainstream coverage, right, as their discovery path. None of them pointed that out.
Yeah, and I think that's true. Like social media is so much more powerful, especially when you're talking about a a media product, like a video-based product, like pro wrestling is. It's gonna be like, oh, this thing caught my eye and I saw it. Um, And I asked again, like, what was your familiarity with wrestling before AEW? Were you, did you watch WWE? Did you watch other promotions? Like, what was it? And this was really interesting because, again, this was a really diverse sheet of answers. Some people said they're big fans of WWE. Some people said that they watched WWE when they were younger and dropped out, were lapsed wrestling fans. Um, Somebody said that they had no idea what pro wrestling was. The only thing they knew about pro wrestling was that people said it was fake. They had never seen a match, nothing, just zero. Which I find that person like the most fascinating to talk to because they literally had no concept of pro wrestling, and then they started watching AEW. Um, so I found that like really interesting because we got some lapsed fans, some regular WWE fans, and then other people that just had like never watched wrestling before in their life.
Right.
Um, and then, next I asked them like, what stands out about the AEW product? What led them to becoming a fan of AEW? What's the thing that grabbed them? Right? We talked about this earlier. Um, it seemed like, especially the people that had familiarity with wrestling, the thing that jumped out to them was the in-ring action, which checks out with the, 95% of survey respondents that said that they enjoyed in-ring action. That was the thing that grabbed them. One person said, you know, the main thing I have come to enjoy about AEW is the physicality of the wrestling. It might sound strange or unusual, but I have come to view it as fundamentally different from the other sports and art forms like television or film. I've also begun to appreciate some of the subtleties of pro wrestling, which I feel that AEW does better than many other promotions, that other promotions clearly being WWE. Um, so that's what's
There,
really kind of grabbing people.
the responses are so diverse here. There's so many good ones. I love this question. I love this part, Jesse. This was such a brilliant idea for you to do, by the way. And for everyone who took the time to answer, thank you, because it's really, really interesting. You had one responder say, AEW has that same vibe as the NWA TV shows with Ric Flair and Dusty from the 80s, great wrestling, cheesy ass acting, nostalgic feel. Then you've got someone saying Orange Cassidy is what grabbed me, right? Then you have someone else talking about the women's division week to week, it's and we have someone here that said something tremendous, right? It's like, at first it was the wrestlers. I'd watched YouTube videos featuring MJF, Kenny Omega, Adam Page, Tony Storm, and Swerve. Then I stayed for the range and storytelling, the balanced comedy and seriousness, the more mature themes and death matches. So, the infamous quote where from Maxwell Jacob Friedman, where he mentioned the flavors of ice cream, right?
Hmm.
He's not that far off. Like, I know a lot of people derided the comment, but when you see new people jumping in and specifically saying, well, I've seen things from the past. I've seen I got in because of a guy like Orange Cassidy, and then I stuck around because they're balancing comedy and great stuff, the comedy and excellence, and then mature themes and death matches. The variety seems to be a sticking point, I find, for these new people to jump in, where they don't feel they're always watching the same thing over and over again. There's change in rhythms, change of pace, change of vibe, change of theme, and they seem to be enjoying it.
Yeah, and I do like that several people say that they really enjoy just how incredibly violent the promotion is.
Yeah,
Which is funny because, we hear so much about how it's a turnoff, and there's definitely fans that don't watch AEW because they feel like it's too violent. I'm not saying those people don't exist, but it was interesting to see the other side of that argument, which we rarely see, which is somebody who like doesn't really watch that much pro wrestling. It's like, whoa, what is this? That guy's sticking a syringe through that guy's cheek. That's fucking crazy. Like,
hmm
and that is exciting to people. Um, so I find that like the one person who said like they had never watched wrestling before was like, actually, it turns out I'm a huge deathmatch fan now,
right.
which is
Yeah.
hilarious. Like it really is. And it's that someone else said that what stands out about AEW is the diversity of talent and storylines. I like that smaller guys like Orange and Darby are able to get over and are allowed to win. I like that we have a variety of wrestling on the show, like high flyers, technical wrestlers, comedy wrestling, hardcore matches, lucha, blah blah blah. And I like that a lot of the storylines have elements that read to me as gay subtext, or in some cases, like Tony and Mina or Bowens, textually gay characters. What really grabbed me though was Orange Cassidy. If he wasn't taken seriously as a wrestler by the company, I doubt I would have actually started watching the product. And you know what stands out about that whole paragraph that person wrote? None of that would happen in WWE.
Nope.
They don't have the diversity of talent storylines. They wouldn't let guys like Orange Darby get over. They wouldn't treat Darby seriously. They wouldn't have the kind of textually gay characters on their television, or certainly not the subtext of gay. Willingly, they might end up having it accidentally, but
Not
uh,
with that. Not with that much finesse. No.
yeah, no. They don't have, the variety of different types of wrestlers and things like that. None of that is going to happen in WWE. That, in essence, everything that person wrote is like what should be driving AEW further because it's like all those things that are appealing to, again, this is somebody who never watched pro wrestling before they started watching AEW. And they've only been watching AEW for the past year. Um, also, we'll get to the next question I asked, which was, while watching AEW for the first time, were you ever confused about certain storylines or wrestlers? Do you think the company should explain past histories and storylines more to help new fans catch up to speed faster? We hear this all the time. There's not enough video packages. They introduced this guy. Who's that? I don't know who that character is. I don't know what that storyline is. And it's always under the guise that a new fan watching the product is going to be super confused and they're never going to get into AEW. So one of the main reasons I want to reach out to these people was to ask to this question. And while definitely some people say like, I wish this was explained a little bit more. I wish maybe there was, a quick version of this. Most of these people prove that they are not complete imbeciles like they're often portrayed by other people, that the
Right.
person watching the wrestling show for the first time is the world's stupidest person that can't pick up on anything. And pretty much every single person was saying like, yeah, I could figure it out. It's not that complicated. I was a little confused at this thing at first, and they talked about this guy in New Japan, and I didn't really know any of that, but it's pro wrestling and it's not that complicated.
I like this one critique specifically where this one of the respondents said a Cliff Notes version would work if it was on TV, but I think it's supplemental stuff like a YouTube video that would be best, bringing some matches onto YouTube so people can get a taste for what the company has to offer might help when talking about the new signings specifically. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and there's all sorts that they can do. I think this was really reaffirming to me, hearing these people talk about and people like being realistic, which is um like like, oh yeah, I didn't know, I didn't really know anything about it, but like I also like just started watching. Of course I wasn't going to know everything. Like it's something like this is a good example. I think like one of the responses said, I started watching around the build to Revolution 2025, never truly felt lost on a storyline. The exception may have been when Jack Perry was the scapegoat. Even after getting an explanation, I still didn't really get it. That's really funny because you can kind of understand why they couldn't really explain the Jack Perry scapegoat
Yeah.
character like
Yeah.
to the general audience because of what it involved, which is probably one of the reasons why that character didn't work, because people like Kyle who responded to this survey said like, I didn't really get what he was doing because they are not in on the wink wink nudge nudge aspects of it.
Right.
Um, and then lastly, I asked them, before you started watching AEW, were you aware of any negative things associated with the promotion, such as the company being too violent, not having any storylines, Tony Khan being a bad booker, etc.? How did that
I
actually,
love this. I
watching
love these
promotion,
responses.
relate to what you've heard about the promotion previously? Because this is something that I find, and this actually came up in the survey, actually, when people were asking, what do they wish they changed? One of the things that came up, not a ton, but it came up a few times, was they wished that, podcasters covered AEW differently. That they felt like there was a toxic energy coming from, the grifting class of podcasters that we've talked about a billion times in the show. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, that spread all this hatred towards AEW. And the concern that I have was like, somebody that is potentially a big AEW fan, or a potential AEW fan, isn't going to give the product a chance because they've all heard this negative stuff about it. And what's
Mhm.
interesting is that pretty much all of our respondents um, say that they've heard negative things about AEW, but that when they watched the show, it was proven wrong. Like,
Right.
this guy
Yeah.
says the only negative thing that I actually took seriously was CM Punk's implosion and eventual firing. Most other AEW criticisms I heard sounded like grifting nonsense. Um, that's what he wrote. That's not what I wrote. I know it sounds like something I wrote, but that is what this person wrote. Um, but a lot of people
Yeah.
kind of have similar things.
I think it's a pretty much overwhelming consensus in that part of the data set that it's the loudest criticism didn't land, right? There's even one respondent who said that they actually came into AEW through Jim Cornette's podcast, where he ended
Yeah,
up liking everything that Cornette hates, which I thought was really funny. One person said here the negative arguments tended to be so strident and vociferous, I dismissed most of them. It struck me that there was no way the program could be that bad. You know, that's essentially the vibe that I got from the respondents from this question. It's they sort of poo-pooed it and dismissed it and just used their brains and were a little reasonable and figured it really just can't be as awful as all of these people make it out to be, right? The bad faith pundit noise may not be converting potential fans into non-viewers as much as they hope. They might be creating maybe more fans than they thought.
yeah. And people, again, we should give them a little bit more credit. They can see through like kind of like the bullshit that's being spewed.
I love the I pulled this one out. I don't know if it was specifically within this question, but
No, go
one
ahead.
person who said, "My very first introduction to AEW was a gif of Orange Cassidy covered in blood, getting his back scratched up by John Moxley. It was the blood and violence that drew me in." I think it's
Yes,
fantastic.
we need to. These people should be celebrated.
Yes.
Um, I do find like a lot of people that among the people that said they had experience with WWE, kind of talked about after seeing AEW, like, um, like how they're like, oh, I saw AEW, and now like I kind of realized that WWE is bad. Um, which is pretty funny. Like this person said, when I asked them what their prior interest in wrestling had been, they said I had gotten very into WWE, quote, and in parentheses, specifically Seth Rollins around
Oh,
June
there
or
you go.
July, which I think is fascinating that Seth Rollins was the person. But again, I think we shouldn't put these people in a box. You never know what's going to appeal to somebody. We can make fun of Seth all we want, but he was enough to get this person into watching wrestling for the first time. Before then, I
I
only knew
mean,
about the standard superstars and general things like Lucha Libre and the more comical things that would happen in Japanese promotions. Now I watch specific WWE matches, but it is, quote, all caps, very jarring how little actual wrestling happens on every show.
yeah.
Um, this person said, I solely watched WWE, but decided to give AEW a try as an alternate as I had grown disillusioned with WWE as a product, and creatively it felt weak. The matches bored me at times, and near enough the entire roster aren't good enough with delivering promos, which disinterests me a lot. I haven't watched WWE since I started watching AEW.
And you know what's crazy, Jesse? It's that these are people who effectively, when you think about it, are wrestling fans, right? And turn to WWE, the market leader, the
That's
number
supposed
one,
to be the best of casual fans.
exactly. And these people were so starved, turns out, for pro wrestling that they had to look elsewhere. So, this also sort of shatters a myth where it's like, oh, you draw in the casual fan, and the casual fan, once they get fed up with WWE, they're going to stop watching. Maybe not. Maybe the fan who's watching WWE will stop watching because they think there's nothing else out there to just satiate their love of pro wrestling. Maybe they're not a WWE fan. Maybe they're just like a pro wrestling fan, but doesn't know that there's anything out there other. I think I think it sort of helps to put a crack a little bit in that assumption that we all have.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to get to? We got to wrap this up. Otherwise, Rich is going to yell at me about the file being too big. But anything in this survey that we talked about?
I think we covered everything that I wanted to talk about. And look, I'm thrilled to have been able to get my hands into the data, Jesse. It's tremendous. The stuff that comes out of here is really, really fascinating. In a year where there are so many people who responded, on top of that, I feel like as the years keep going on, we're getting a clearer and clearer picture, and we're starting to see, we'll be able to see very, very soon, like real through lines and trends as to how things are evolving within the AEW fan sphere. This is great stuff again this year, Jesse, and I do hope you continue for many, many, many years to come.
Yeah, no, it was a great result. This was, I think, the best year. I think as we're doing more, I'm getting, I think, better and better at like actually running the survey. Next time, we'll be trying to block somebody from spamming us with Ace Austin answers. But I think getting the perspective from the new fans, I think, is honestly the most fascinating aspect of all this. But just going right and reading about people's different opinions. I mean, seeing people like there were people who like it's really funny. Like there are people who responded like to the Tony Khan, do you trust Tony Khan question. People said no, and like he's like a Mark fanboy that only cares
Right.
about Meltzer stars, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they said that they're like when you looked at like who their favorite wrestlers are, they said like Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay were their favorite wrestlers. So it's like, and you would think like, oh, who's their favorite wrestler is gonna be like it's very funny like that. I think it's we should never assume these things about the fans. There's so much more. Even the an individual fan has so much more diverse thought about AEW than I think that people, the average person, gives them credit for. And
Yeah,
it really is
absolutely.
hammered home when you look at some of these like almost like conflicting answers they have question to question about the product.
Yeah, because I agree. It's really funny going off on, he's booking for Meltzer, and then your two favorite wrestlers are considered to be the booked for Meltzer wrestlers.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is really funny.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Warren, for joining the show. Thanks a lot to everyone who listens to the show, but also thanks to everyone who filled out the survey. And I really just like the average survey respondent provides such a high quality amount of answers. There's a couple people that kind of just check off the boxes and don't answer the question, the open answer questions. But the average person puts in like actual serious effort into this, and we have all of this data, and I have this kind of project, and it's only because people are willing to take the time to fill it out. So I want to thank everyone who did that. And I'll talk to everyone again after a while.
Hello, Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network listeners. I am Jeff Hawkins, co-host of Shake Them Ropes, with a very special announcement. If it's been a while or you've never listened to us before, the original gang is back. Myself and Rob McCarran, back talking wrestling. We have no idea where this show's going to go, where we're going to keep any of the old bits or any of the old things in there. It's going to be a process. It's going to be a journey, and we'd like for you to come along with us. Only on Shake Them Ropes on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.